Thanks, Cindy.
Good to see you.
So should we start now, or do you want me to wait a little while, Allison?
Just wait 1 minute, but feel free to load her up.
I think you can see my slides and only the slides, right? Okay.
Yeah,
looks great.
It's very cute. That chick is very mysterious in the background. I love it.
And I feel like you you newer grad students, not newer, but newer than me, just the quality of your presentations are just massive. Yeah, maybe we'll give it another minute or so for a couple more people to show up. I don't want you to start too soon.
Got it. Yeah, it's kind of hard to know if people are back or not because there's no, because not everybody leaves when they go to lunch.
Yeah, let's get some reactions. If you're here,
yeah. If you're here, react. Or throw up your hand. Yay. All right, there we go.
Okay, perfect. I'll turn it over to you, Kris, to lead our colony management and monitoring studies session. Thank you.
All right, thanks of you that threw up your hands. We appreciate it, reacted. Just making sure that we have a good showing for after lunch. My name is Kris Vagos. I'm the refuge wildlife biologist at Stuart B. McKinney in Connecticut. And our section right now is colony management and monitoring studies. So we're going to have 2 presentations followed by about a 20-minute discussion on all things colony. So I'm going to hand it over to Cindy, who's got a great presentation. I'll let her introduce her presentation.
Thank you, and thanks everyone for coming. So today I will present a little bit of my work with the eggs in Greco Island. This is actually an update of what I've been doing, trying to distinguish common and roseate terns eggs. So I would like to start thanking all my co-authors and all institutions that are involved with this work, either by funding it or contributing with personnel for making this possible. So this is a very inexpensive research, well, part of it, and I will explain why, because it deals mainly with photos. This is mostly something that have been intriguing me while I was doing census in Greco Island. So I started in 2022, and one of the main tasks that the crew has is to do the census. We pretty much have to count how many roseates and common terns nests we have in the island. So to distinguish the nests, well, first we look at the eggs and see how they look like. So this is a common tern egg. It's a more rounded egg, and it has this brown speckles, but they are big and they are more concentrated in the basal portion of the egg. In comparison to roseate terns eggs, they are more elongated, and they also have the speckles, but the speckles tend to be smaller and distributed everywhere in the egg. However, some birds, they don't obey the rule, neither of how the egg will look like, and also where they will build their nests. So this, for example, this nest is in the open. The eggs are not elongated, and the speckles are very strong in the basal portion of the egg. So these guys just like to mess up with our senses sometimes. We also have this edge habitats that we have this very big portion of an habitat that it's open and it's well explored by the common terns. But we also have in this photo this big pile of bricks and concrete that you would think, oh, this is too open for a roseate tern build their nest. But apparently these guys, they thought that their nest would be covered enough by this piece of concrete, so they just decided to build their nest in there. So what I'm trying to tell you with this is that we can't rely solely on the egg shape and color, neither in the location. So this is an easy edge habitat because we have this pile of rocks that can give you a clue that maybe roseate terns will explore that area. But some habitats are harder to tell. For example, we may have, as this photo here on the left bottom, that has some vegetation, but the vegetation didn't fully grow yet. So the birds may think that will grow tall enough to cover their nests. But as this guy here on the top right, it didn't grow tall enough to cover its nest. So it ends up that it's a roseate tern egg nest in the open. And also common terns like to explore this area with vegetation because they want some shelter for their chicks as well. So they may end up building their nests close to vegetation. And as Margaret mentioned in her talk earlier, we did end up this year with a couple of 4 clutch-sized roseate terns nests. There are classic roseate terns. They are under a rock, but the number of eggs don't match with the nest that you would think it was a roseate tern. So this shows us that neither location only or the egg shape and color only can tell you which species is which. And regarding the location, stay tuned for the next talk because Jess will talk all about it and how the roseate terns are exploring different areas other than the classic under rocks and inside nest boxes to build their nests. Okay, so this raised a couple of questions in my head, like, okay, we did have this description of classic roseates and common terns egg morphology, but can we numerically say if an egg is a roseate or a common tern egg? So this is what I'm trying to do with this project, is to quantify the morphological characteristics of eggs and try to assign to one species or the other. And also for those eggs that don't follow the classic description, I started to think, like, are they maybe hybrids between roseates and common terns that we are not detecting by looking at them? So part of my project is also trying to detect roseate and common tern hybridization using the eggs and associate this hybridization with egg morphology. But today I will focus only on the morphological characteristics of eggs. I will not talk about the genomic portion of this work. But if you are interested, I'm presenting at the Waterbird Society meeting in Costa Rica in January. So, and I'm also happy to talk about this portion of my work with you in the chat or in the questions on email. Okay, so for today, what I will present to you is the results of the 2023 nest photos. I took photos of 214 eggs from 104 nests, 88 roseate terns eggs, and 126 common terns eggs. And I took these photos trying to see if I could associate or assign one species to the other just by looking at the eggs. So at first, I anonymized all photos and assigned a species ID just by looking at the photos. Then I checked the assignments against field species verification, and what I had was 19% of common terns eggs from photos were mistaken as roseate terns, while 30% of roseate terns eggs from photos were mistaken as common terns. Okay. So how can we minimize this visual error? Can we numerically minimize this? Can we try to measure and see if the measurements will have a better solution for us other than the visual? So what I did as a second step was to take all those photos and put them in a software called ImageJ. I used a plugin called Egg Tool to measure all the eggs. And the measurements I took were width and length. But I'm also interested in seeing this elongated versus classic prolate ellipsoid or classical egg that we have in the description for commons or roseate terns. So I calculated with the width and the length the shape index of each egg to see if they were under 72%, they would be elongated, consequently roseate terns, or if they were between 72 and 76%, they would be classical eggs or roseate terns eggs, or common terns eggs, sorry. So I took the length, the width, and the shape index, and I ran different discriminant function analysis on R to see if the measurements I took would tell me which species that to which species that egg belonged to. So at first, what I did was to calculate the nearest neighbor. And this model works pretty much by looking, let's say, at B. It will take the measurement of, let's say, length in B and compare this to A and C and see if just by looking at that measurement and comparing with the neighbors, I could tell that that species is a roseate or a common tern. But then I got interested in explore more this morphological characteristics of eggs in a different model. So I ended up running a discriminant function analysis random forest model. So if you were here yesterday and watched Iman's talk, she explained really well what a random forest model is. So I would be very brief explaining it to you. So how the way this works is that this random forest takes 1/3 of your data, trains your model, and then takes the other 2/3 of your data and compared to the training model and builds this phylogenetic tree to see, one, if the data that the model is analyzing is good to determine whatever you are trying to determine. In this case, I'm trying to determine species. And from all the characteristics that you are feeding on your model, which one will be the best one to assign whatever you are trying to assign? In this case, which one would be best to assign species? So I will show you the results only for the random forest model, but as a spoiler, I can tell you that the results are the same. So regarding the width, we did not have a significant difference between roseates and common terns. What we can see is that common terns have less variation in the width in comparison to roseate terns that had more variation in their width. Both species also did not have a significant difference in length. And again, as for width, common terns had way less variation in their length measurements in comparison to roseate terns. Because they didn't have any significant difference in width and length, they did not have a significant difference in shape index. So we can't tell them apart just by looking at those measurements. But what is also intriguing is that, okay, remember that to be more elongated, the eggs needed to be under 72% of shape index. Well, we had both species with results pretty similar-ish, but the ones that we can for sure say it is an elongated egg and it is a roseate tern egg, is only for those guys that are under 72%. So all the ones that are under the mean of the shape index of the eggs. Okay, so I ran the model and I tried to see, okay, I don't see this difference visually. Let me see if numerically the model can tell me the difference between the species just by looking at the measurements. And what I had was an error rate of 27.3% in my model, which means that 16 of my common tern nests were assigned as roseate terns nests, while 11 of my roseate terns nests were assigned as common tern nests. Okay, I told you that the nearest neighbor and the random forest results were the same, and they are indeed the same. They are about 30% of error rate. But the big difference here is this graph. So that's why I wanted to do the random forest and show you guys. It's a big difference, but if you were expecting any difference, it's not that exciting. So let me explain that to you. So the random forest model, it gives me this Gini index, which means that the model tells me which of my variables contributes more or don't contribute that much to reduce the impurity of my data or to reduce the error rate. So in this graph, I have in the x-axis the Gini index and in the y-axis each variable. And while we were expecting that the shape index, elongated versus classic egg, would tell us something to differentiate the species, but it's actually the worst in the rank in comparison to length and width to tell us which species is which. So as conclusions, we think that the egg morphology is not as distinct as we were expecting, or the numbers will not tell us that the egg is more elongated versus more rounded. So the numbers themselves will not tell you with zero error which species is which, but the error could be worse, is 30%. However, we are dealing with an endangered species that we are trying to conserve. So is 30% good enough for the conservation of roseate terns? So as future steps, what I'm planning to do is to calculate the area of the speckles and where in the egg they are concentrated and see if I can match the speckles with the shape and width and length and see if I can have better results for my model to predict which species is which by just looking at the eggs. And with that, I would take any questions that you have.
Yeah, we have a couple minutes and then for questions, if any, or we can take a couple questions if anybody has one. Carolyn, I see your hand up.
Yep. Thanks, Cindy. I'm so interested in your talk because each year I do these censuses on Bird and Ram Islands, and we have all of these volunteers, many of whom have never been in a tern colony, much less been able to distinguish between the eggs. And so I have to give them a crash course, and I need to be on hand to sort out all of the tricky nests. And I always tell them, because they can get fixated on just one characteristic that you tell them. And I always tell them you have to look at all of the things. And one of the things that we look at is the elongation of the eggs, because there are lots of roseate eggs that are long and pointy. I ran into a problem this year because we didn't have a lot of long and pointy roseate eggs, so it made it harder to train them. And so when I saw your talk, it reminded me of this issue, and I started wondering if maybe we had low volume or low mass eggs this year, and that was reflected in the length of the eggs, if you know what I mean. Like they were just smaller eggs overall. And maybe, yeah, so maybe they just like couldn't get the resources together, and so they were small. And so I went back and I looked at the data for a few years, and it was not the case. anyway, I just wondered if you had any thoughts about that, or if you'd taken a series of photos in different years to look at how, if there's changes in shape over the years. I didn't measure length. We haven't measured width and length in a long time. So I can't conclusively say, yep, they were shorter eggs this year, but just sort of anecdotally, it seemed like they were, and it kind of caused problems with training our volunteers. Do you have any experience with that over the past couple of years?
Well, my first experience was when 2022, when I was one of those volunteers being trained and having a hard time in those eggs that are in this edge habitats. So that's why I started to get more intrigued with the eggs. I do have measurements for 2024, but I didn't present here yet because I don't have all the nests analyzed. I just have part of it. And we did find at the Great Gull Island office a couple of slides that we are hoping to use for this egg measurement. The standard will not be the same because I take the photos in the same angle with the same camera, and it's only me taking the photos. But we will try to use those slides and measure eggs, and I think they are from the 80s, to see if I can have a comparison between years. What I can tell you is that, well, maybe visually we were not seeing this difference, but the numbers themselves indeed show that there is no difference in the length, width, and shape index between the species. So I feel that, as you said, it's a lot of experience to look at an egg and tell which species is which. But the numbers are also not showing this. I can tell you, we had a reduction in 2024 in comparison to 2023, for example, which are the years that I have the photos, because the numbers don't show this difference. We don't have smaller eggs in 2024 in comparison to 2023. I mean, I didn't run the stats yet. I just look at the numbers, but maybe next year I can tell you with a model and for certain that they are not different.
Okay, thank you. Great work.
Thank you.
All right, so there's some comments in the chat regarding maybe an app that you're trying to build, Cindy. Is that correct? Do you want to talk about that?
I didn't tell anyone that I was trying to build an app because I think it would be very challenging, but it's in my dreams to do so. So that's why I'm hoping to have this numerical way to train AI to tell which nest is which. It would be awesome if we could just point our phones to a nest and then the AI calculate and tell me if it's a roseate or a common. As I said, 30% is not horrible, but it's also, in my perspective and talking to my advisor, Margaret, we think that it's not awesome as well because this is an endangered species and we don't have the luxury of having 30% of error rates. So we'll see. Hopefully in the future we will. I also saw a question regarding the spectrophotometer to quantify the egg color, and we did consider that, but for the past 2 years, actually I had a conversation with Dr. Payton in the field to see how we could try to control for color. And we agreed that for now, it wouldn't be our goal because we would have to take the eggs and put it in a controlled environment for controlled light. And because, again, we are dealing with an endangered species, we wanted to minimize the impact. So we didn't want to manipulate any eggs. So we are not doing that yet, maybe in the future, but this is not the goal for this work. Are the methods to take pictures of the nests on Great Gull Island outlined in federal permit? We have permits to take the pictures, and we told in the permit how we were doing it. And we are trying to maintain a standard this is very rough because it's in the field, so it's a standard is pretty hard when you are carrying cameras and trying to take pictures while you are being attacked by birds and pooped. But pretty much I try as much as I can to keep the same angle that I look down and take the pictures. And everything is outlined in permits, and we have the permits, and I'm happy to share with anyone that has interest on that.
Great. Thank you so much, Cindy. We're going to move
Thank
on
you.
to Jess, and then we'll have more time at the end to talk, to ask you more questions. Thank you so much. That was
Thank you.
awesome. So now we have a presentation by Jessica Espinosa. Jessica, are you here?
Yes, I am.
Are you going to share your screen, or did you want Allison
Sure,
to?
I'll share. Yeah, if that's
Okay,
okay.
great.
Unless
All
it
right.
doesn't.
Okay, thanks so much.
Okay, can everybody see that? Okay, it's all good?
Yep, we can see it.
Awesome. Okay. So, hi everybody. Along with Cindy, I'm also a PhD student in Margaret Vega's lab at the University of Connecticut. And broadly for my dissertation, I'm looking at roseate terns, nesting, and sea level rise on Great Gull Island. Starting off, as many of us know, roseates in the Northwest Atlantic prefer nesting under some sort of cover, unlike their common tern relatives. And uniquely, Great Gull Island is the only place we know of where they nest in this large rocky revetment that surrounds the island. This revetment was originally placed here by the Army to prevent erosion. But unfortunately, it's beginning to fail. Sea level rise is both raising the water level around the edges of the island and is increasing the intensity of wave action during storms. You can see this in the difference between the 1949 picture here and the 2021 picture, especially near the big gun emplacement at the eastern tip of the island. And the arrows are indicating places with particularly bad erosion. As roseates nest in the rocky revetment and generally near the perimeter of the island, the erosion and sea level rise is of concern for management. And here's a picture of all the nests on the island found in 2024 during our all-island nest count. The revetment is this rocky area shown in gray here around the edges of the island. And as you can see, most of their nests are in or adjacent to the revetment. The areas where we found nests stayed generally the same between years, but the total number of nests has increased over time, which is great. So here's a breakdown of those nests with type on the x-axis. The y-axis shows the percent of total nests made up by each nest type for that particular year. The two most abundant sites were in the rocky revetment and in artificial nest boxes, which together total around 70% of nests each year. Most nest types stayed generally in the same proportion year to year, except for open sites, which did appear to increase. And the other nest types to the right of the graph here have always been in the minority, and this hasn't really changed much over the years. So as we know, most roseate nests are either in rocks or boxes, and there's a concern about future sea level rise affecting nest site loss. So it's pretty important to know what might actually happen to those nests in the future. One way to get at this is to model potential inundation and storm surge levels on the island, which I'm currently working on. This will provide a minimum sea level rise without taking erosion into account. And this map here is showing the base current sea level with no rise in water level. And as we know, there are many different climate projections out there, but for Long Island Sound, most are expecting at least a 1 meter increase in sea level by 2100. And under this scenario, we would lose about 11% of land, but only about 1% of roseate nest sites on the island. Then when we look at 2 meters sea level rise, which is expected under the high emission scenario by 2100, the amount of land loss jumps to about 20% and about 10% of nest sites become inundated. But then when we get to 3 meters sea level rise, which is expected under the high emission scenario, when you also account for storm surge levels, the amount of land loss jumps up to 44%, with about 30% of nest sites becoming inundated. So this means about a third of all the nests on Great Gull Island are potentially vulnerable to flooding by 2100, which is not great news. And this situation becomes even more dire when you look specifically at nests in the rocky revetment. The y-axis here is the percent of nests in the rocks in each year surveyed, and the x-axis is where these nests sit in elevation. About 50% of nests, so in this red box, are located within this revetment are vulnerable to flooding. So therefore, we need some sort of effective management strategy to create viable nesting sites at higher elevations on the island. So one management strategy is to create more nest boxes at higher elevations and attempt to encourage birds to move from the rocks into these boxes. But before we do this, we need to know what birds find attractive about nest boxes and how successful these birds are at breeding in boxes as opposed to in their natural rock sites. So on Great Gull Island, people have already been putting out nest boxes for over 3 decades. However, there was no complete map of all the boxes on the island, and their sizes and shapes have generally not been standardized, so we needed some sort of baseline for box occupancy on the island. So to get some idea as to what characteristics might be attractive, we inventoried, numbered, and recorded characteristics for every box on the island in summers 2022 to 2024, and we set up experimental plots with new boxes. So out of 14 variables, only about half of them significantly affected occupancy. Occupancy increased in boxes with fewer neighbors, like this box up here. Also in those with partially covered entrances, which are all of these boxes in this photo. Also in deeper boxes, so like this box over here on the left. Also in freestanding boxes, like this same box here, with the arrow versus apartment style or conjoined boxes. Also in boxes at higher elevations or in higher terrace rows. And in boxes that were located on the southern and the western sides of the island, and those with an aspect that faced south. So now that we know their preferred nest box characteristics, we're in the process of replacing old boxes with new boxes. Since historically only about 25% of them have been occupied in a given year, this graph is showing the percent occupation of all the boxes on the island over the last 3 years as we've been slowly replacing boxes around the island. The letters above each bar indicate significant differences in occupation between years, so occupation has significantly increased over time, which is great news. And this signals that so far we've had some excellent uptake. But before we try and move a quarter of the population of a federally endangered bird into nest boxes, we do need to make sure that the birds don't just adopt the boxes, but they actually do as well in them as they would in rock sites. We don't want to, for instance, find out after we put out lots of boxes and attracted birds into them that they're actually sink habitats. Therefore, we set out to find out whether the productivity in the boxes is the same as in the rocks. So we measured productivity by setting up 2 plots on the island. This white box on the right surrounds an area where we replaced old-style boxes with a collection of experimental boxes designed after the signals we received on box preference. We then chose an area nearby for the rock transect to control for aspect, area of the island, predators, and other confounding variables. We marked and attempted to follow all the nests within these plots from egg laying until fledging throughout the season by doing productivity checks every other day. And we banded as many chicks with plastic field rotable bands in the plots as possible and documented their survival. And for the boxes, we were able to watch these nests from blinds, but for rock nests, these nests are generally impossible to see from the blinds as they're located under these giant boulders in the revetment. So therefore, in 2024, I piloted using a method with none other than ghost hunting cameras, as they have a really great night vision and resolution. And we had a great amount of success detecting daily chick presence with those, as you can see in this picture here on the right, with the adult feeding a chick at a rock nest. And then at the end of the season, we conducted resights from blinds looking for chicks that were sitting on top of the rocky revetment, as this meant that these chicks had fledged. And we considered fledged chicks to be our end productivity metric. I'll also note that we do know there is variation in fledging rates among boxes on the island, as location does matter. So the whole island estimate that Margaret gave earlier includes that variation, so it's a bit lower than what I'll show here. And in order to control for location effects in this talk, I'm only comparing productivity in the experimental box plot to the experimental rock transect. So the first thing we calculated was the hatching success of each nest. This graph shows the average number of chicks that hatched by nest type in both 2023 and 2024. The y-axis is the number of chicks, and the x-axis is broken down by years and nest type. I also included the hatching success per egg here to demonstrate that the pattern holds irrespective of individual nest success. We found hatching success doesn't differ by nest types within years or between years. And overall, hatching success is quite high at around 90%, which is good news for the viability of box nests. This next graph gives the average number of fledged chicks per nest, which is typically how other studies report their nest productivity. And we again found no difference between boxes and rocks within each year, but we found variation in success between 2023 and 2024, indicating there's a difference between years. Now, we also know from the literature and previous studies that mortality largely occurs early on and manifests in either unhatched or predated eggs or chicks that die before day 2. Therefore, if we're interested in how likely these chicks are to live if they hatch when accounting for early mortality, we can look at fledging success of hatched chicks only. So here I've also shown the success of fledging per chick to demonstrate the same pattern. So when looking in terms of fledging success of chicks that hatch per nest, again, 2024 overall had a higher fledge rate of chicks that hatched than 2023, and overall rocks had a higher rate than boxes. So the literature also indicates that productivity differs with hatch order, with A chicks generally having higher productivity than B chicks. Therefore, we also wanted to look at differences in productivity based on hatch order between nest types. So here's some preliminary data on that. So looking at hatching success, there's no significant difference between years, between nest types, or between A and B chicks. When we look at fledging success of all eggs laid, A and B chicks in boxes differ from each other in some years, but not in others. And so B chicks overall differ between years. When looking at fledging success of hatched chicks, A and B chicks don't appear to differ from each other by nest type, but in certain years, B chicks in boxes do worse than B chicks in rocks. So overall, we can come to some preliminary conclusions. And the first is that there is some variation in success based on which productivity metric you choose to use, as mortality often occurs early on for roseates, so it's important to take this into account when trying to implement management actions. There's also this year-to-year variation in productivity, indicating that productivity varies based on factors other than just nest type, such as food availability, etc. In addition, hatch order matters in certain years, but largely not for boxes, or largely only for boxes, but not so much for rock nests. And most importantly, box and rock nests have similar productivity when accounting for yearly variation, specifically in terms of the number of chicks that make it to fledging, which is the main thing we wanted to elucidate from this study, though we should not assume that all box types and locations are equally productive. So overall, this is good news. This means that we can tentatively conclude that boxes can be a viable management strategy for roseates on Great Gull Island. And thank you to all the organizations and grants that provided funding for this project, and to everybody who contributed their time and expertise. And I'd be happy to take questions.
We have time, so if anybody has any questions, raise your hands. That was great, Jessica. Thank you. Any questions, anyone? I didn't see any in the chat either. I have one. Has Great Gull Island ever seen a predator that hones in on the boxes in the box shape? We had that happen in 2021 on Faulkner, where the black-crowned night herons were really honing in on box type. And so our boxes out on the North Spit, which had been pretty successful as far as productivity, comparable to the revetment, because we also have a rock revetment. You know, all 12 boxes, you know, all 12 nests, got predated within a couple of days of each other. Have you ever experienced anything like that? And how would that affect moving things from the rocks to the boxes?
Yeah, so in terms of all of the boxes, I don't know. We haven't noticed it, but we have noticed location effects. So, for instance, at the very eastern tip of the island, there's a bunch of boxes that are facing out. They're on a little rocky outcrop and they're facing out. And they're the closest to Little Gull Island, which is where all the gulls are. And so the gulls will come over, and those boxes were originally open, completely open in the front, and basically all of the chicks in there would be gone mid-season because they would just be picked off by the gulls, even though the birds in there would just continue to breed every year. So we replaced those this year with partially covered fronts, and I think they did better. Those weren't part of our plot, but they did do better. So there is this location effect, and I actually have one of my variables is looking at the distance away from Little Gull Island, which is basically how far away west it is. But also within the plot, within the actual terrace plot that we looked at, the terrace, the arrays that were farther away from Little Gull were a lot more occupied than the ones that were closer, which was very interesting. So don't know if that is part of it, but it does seem to be a location effect for the boxes and predation. Yeah.
Great. Anyone else have any questions for Jessica? Thank you, Jessica. That was great.
Thanks.
So we have about 10 minutes for any questions on colony management, or monitoring studies. Does anybody want to start off with a topic? I have some some topics if nobody has any right now. I don't see any in the chat. Anybody? Okay. Sarah?
Hi, Jessica, great talk. I just wanted to learn a little bit more about the ghost cameras. I've done some work with cameras and trying to photograph the terns, so I just wanted to see what made you select those ones.
Sure. So a couple years ago, we got these, they're called Reolink cameras, which are not the ghost cameras. Reolink cameras, which are basically security cameras that we put out, and they are solar powered, so they have a little solar array. But they also use cell service to connect, so you have to have an active cell line, and they're larger, so it's hard to put places, and they didn't always connect on the island. So those became cumbersome. So somebody else actually had, for a different project, had a couple of these ghost stop cameras. That's the name of the company. And they're little, they're very small. They were using them for something totally different, but they also had good night vision, and they can do time lapse and motion capture, things like that. And so we tried putting those out. Those aren't waterproof like the Reolink cameras, and you do have to change the battery every time. So we only put those out for a couple hours each day. We would go out each day and put the cameras out by the nests where we thought the nests were. And it was only 1 to 2 hours to try and get the, yes, ghosts around at night, Joan, and to try to get the chick presence. So we didn't put them out all day. And even so, we still got good detection of the chicks throughout the season. And only by putting them out for about 2 hours. But those were much larger videos, and they use a lot more power. So depends on what you need it for, but both cameras were good at night and good during the day. So
awesome. Thank you so much.
Jessica, can you put a link to where you can find the camera in the chat when you get a chance? That would be super helpful. Thanks so much. Okay, we've got Jeff Spendlow.
Yeah, I have a question for you, Jessica. Do you have any information as to how long the oldest chick remained at the nest site? Did you collect that for your box and rock nests?
How long the oldest chick? I can collect that. I don't know off the top of my head, but there were a number of, I'm just thinking about both the boxes and the rocks. The oldest chick was there past fledging generally by a day or two. But I'm also just thinking of the difference between the commons and the roseates was very stark this year. The commons were there a lot longer at their nests. But from the rock nests, from the videos that I'm remembering, they were there basically until the second chick fledged, usually, because you would see both of them in the camera. And usually similar time frame for the boxes, maybe a day earlier, depending on when they're leaving. But does that kind of answer your question? I haven't fully analyzed that data, but yes.
Yeah, because I found differences back when we did some experimentation with box designs on Faulkner, that the nests where the chicks stayed in them longer tend to be the most productive ones.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense, yeah. Yeah, I'd have to look at that. But we were doing productivity checks every other day. So if they were at their boxes or their nests in the rocks, we would know that, and we would have seen the chicks. So that basically signaled that they were there throughout the whole season. Sometimes we would just see them on the rocks at the end, but generally we would see them throughout the season.
Joan, do you have a question?
It's more a comment. I just wanted to point out that Jess's work is so novel for us at Great Gull. Really, the chicks that were nesting in the revetment were really a mystery because they're just down there in the dark. And as you approach the nest, the chicks scurry away from the nest. And so after a few days, it's very difficult to even be able to get weights. Forget about knowing if they're alive. So what Jess has been able to do is find this affordable tool so that you can even you can get eyes on them finally. And they do stay at their nest sites. They don't go wandering. They're just a little bit out of the way. And I just for anybody else who has that sort of problem with birds down in rocks, I just think Jess has really cracked the code on roseates in the dark.
And I just posted the ghost cameras.
Sorry. Go ahead, Jessica.
Oh, sorry. I
Yeah,
was just going to say I
so
just
much.
posted the ghost cameras.
I was just going to say that I thank you for doing that. So the link to the cameras, the ghost stop cameras, is now in the chat for anybody that's interested. We were using, or we still use, GoPros in our revetment to get an idea of productivity, because they are really hard to find. But I've never tried to use, I don't even know if they would work at night. I don't think so, because I'm not even sure whether they have night vision, but that's pretty interesting to get them 24 hours. Yeah. Anybody else have any questions? We have about 3 minutes left. Another thing I thought was really interesting about your presentation, Jessica, is the sea level rise, because in my presentation, I showed pictures of our North Spit. I was wondering if anybody had any other comments on sea level rise and how that's affecting. I know Carolyn also showed, was that Bird or Ram Island, Carolyn? One of the islands.
That was Bird Island. Yeah.
Bird Island. Okay. Yeah.
And we actually, raised the revetment, relative to its old level. It's also constructed a little bit differently than the Faulkner and Great Gull revetments, which are much looser, which is why we have to chink that revetment to make sure chicks and adults don't get in it.
So they don't get caught in there, right?
Right.
Yeah, I found that interesting, because the only way so as the sea level rises, as we saw on Jessica's maps, what we're left with is what's above. And, for Faulkner Island, that's some shelves and some very vegetated slopes and the top of the island. So it's going to be interesting to see the next phase of this. And then Margaret says that Jess worked her tail off to get the data. So thank you, Jess. They're giving you kudos in the chat there. Eileen, you wanted to talk about possibly like declining resources or maybe predation, including rats.
Yeah, I was.
Do you want to jump on?
Yeah. I was wondering if anybody else was dealing with rats or if we were kind of alone in that. And then the other one was resources and how, if anybody else is, we're in the same boat with that as well. We have very much declining resources and are unsure of even what level of monitoring we will be able to do this year. So, yeah.
Right, we have Carolyn.
Unfortunately, we have dealt with rats a couple of times, and we've been able to manage it by putting out rat poison pretty extensively, and that's taken care of the problem immediately. But we've not had a colony of rats become established. You know, this is probably like a rat or maybe a couple of rats at most. So yeah, it would be a very different situation, but we can talk about, you know, how we placed rat poison, you know, in a way that would safer the terns if you want to at some point in time.
Yeah, that would be great.
And, you know,
Margaret?
we're always dealing with
Sorry.
limited resources. So, and we've spoken even this week about how we're
Yeah.
dealing with it with our volunteer interns, and that's been really successful, but it is quite a lot of work to work with new interns. And of course, we're working with, you know, brand new staff because they're the ones that are eager for the experience and are willing to not get paid.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Margaret?
Yeah, with respect to rats, I just wanted to say that we do not have rats on Great Gull Island, but we live in fear of getting rats. And part of what our conservation planning exercise did for us was to bring, you know, sort of forward in our consciousness the importance of setting up a surveillance and prevention program so that rats don't get introduced. Anyone on the call who has, you know, experience or information, insight into how to set up a really, you know, an effective surveillance program, again, with no new resources, love to hear from you. I don't know if you know, if there's anyone on the call who's done some of this eradication work who has more news than we do at this point about what's the best way to set up a surveillance program.
Hey, I was gonna chime in earlier. We lost internet for a bit, but a couple of years ago, I can't remember the name of the company now, but they're based in Australia or New Zealand, and they have all these remote rat traps that are CO2 piston. So, but they were experimenting with ones for small mammals. So I got into like a test thing for thinking they would work for mink, but they didn't. I couldn't get mink to go into them. But I remember that company had like almost like bait items that you could put out, and then you would identify who bit them to tell what if a rat was present or something. So they had I remember they had all these links about like how they determined where the rats were and where these units would be most effective. But I'm wondering, Eileen, if it would make sense if we should send those units that we're not using to you for Monomoy, because then the idea is like there's bait that the rat puts their head up into it. It's kind of morbid. And then a piston drives, CO2 drives a piston through their head, and then they fall out. And so the trap keeps working. So they were designed for use in remote areas where you don't have the ability to run, you know, frequent trap lines. So they keep killing. Without, you know, if you have a snap trap, it catches one rat and then that's it.
Right.
But
we would take them, Linda, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm assuming, even though I don't know what the difference was, because we tried this years ago, so I have to go back and look. Like these ones again were supposed to be for like they designed it for stoats, but we were trying to use it for mink. I'm assuming it would work on rats, and since we already have it, it wouldn't be any cost to try and see if it
Right.
works.
Yeah.
No,
definitely.
But I do remember they had yeah, like almost like these cracker type things where they could see teeth marks, and they use those for surveillance, Margaret. So there might be or people use like track boards and stuff like that too, but they definitely had some recommendations. I can remember watching videos and reading information about rat surveillance, and I'm sure Alaskan refuges could help you a lot with that because a lot of them deal with rats.
Allison, do I have time to let Ricardo ask his question? Let me go into the break a little bit.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Ricardo, go ahead. And this is the last question. Sorry.
It's not a question, just a comment. In Florida, we use the Sherman traps, the small mammal traps. We'll saturate an island with about 100 traps during the non-nesting season. And if we catch even one, then we'll set out those rodenticides using warfarin, which is generation 1, which is less lethal, less potential for bycatch for other for birds or raptors or anything like that. The more nights you put it out, the more likely you could catch something. But but we found that even with one trap night, if we don't catch anything out of we put out 100 traps, and we just bait it with Quaker oats or oatmeal, so it's not toxic to anything. And you can reuse the traps year after year. So it's fairly cheap and inexpensive way to check for small mammals or rats.
That's really helpful. It's a point obviously well taken that's come up in the chat, that it's important to, as well as, some folks talking, that it's important to do a lot of this surveillance over the winter when the birds are not on the island, right? That we would probably not put out rodenticides during the actual year. And if you put them out in the winter time, you sort of want them in traps that are going to close on the critter you're killing, because you're going to get side effects on passing raptors who are going to take the bodies and eat them. So it's a complicated problem. But I really appreciate everything that the resources folks have put in the chat. Thank you.
That's great. Okay, Allison, I'm handing it back over to you for the bird banding lab.
Thank you. And thanks everyone. This is great discussion. Keep it up in the chat and we can loop back around to this if we need to a little bit later. But let me call up Jennifer McKay. She's going to present on her knowledge of USGS bird banding lab and banding guidance specifically for roseate terns. I can't hear you yet.
Yeah,
Jennifer.
sorry, I didn't have the I started with the sharing and not the unmuting.
Perfect.
Okay. Everybody.
Looks good.
All right, great. Oh, did it unpresent? Okay, hold on. What? Just stop. Okay. All right, quick introduction. My name is Jen McKay. I've been with the bird banding lab for over 10 years now, and you're gonna watch a do's don'ts, presentation, and hopefully we'll have some time for Q&A afterwards for all the questions that you might have. Before I get into the nitty-gritty of the presentation, though, I wanted to do a few quick plugs. The first is for the Bander portal. If you haven't already signed up, I encourage you to do so. Create an account. You can access all the functions. It doesn't matter if you're a master, a sub-permittee, or a data manager. You can get on, and you can see multiple permits because it asks which permit you want to be looking at. So you just need to be associated with a permit. You need the email that we have on file for that, for you as the sub or master, whatever, to access the portal, but get in there. It's great. Once you've logged in, you've got access to a variety of functions. The landing page gives you all the tabs that you need, and there are some quick links. And for all the frequently used features, and I want to point out that there's trainings. Those are really important. They go into depth and give you more tips and tricks that, to help you navigate. Second plug is for MTabs. Just a little over 2 years ago, we really made a dedicated effort to update these, make them more user-friendly, make them more relatable to you guys. And so, this is our main means of communication to banders. They carry a lot of significant information related to everything bird banding. They're not just sent to master permit holders anymore. We send them out to sub-permittees. Please feel free to share them. And it's, it gives things like permit reminders, specific messages, events, publications, how-tos on data management, video tutorials, and guides like our new auxiliary marker guide for how to submit auxiliary markers. So if you haven't started reading those, please do so. Okay, so let's get down to the nitty-gritty. We're going to talk about some myths and misconceptions, some do's and don'ts. Like, I have someone who manages my data, but they don't work in the field. What do I do? How do I prevent delinquent data or those pesky up for banding emails? What if I'm caught an already banded bird and I'm adding a flag or a transmitter, or I'm changing its flag? I saw a bird 3 times in the breeding season. Do you guys really want to know that? Does the BBL really want to know that I've seen it 3 times this summer? I caught a bird banded in South America and I want to know more about it. What do I do? Can I add a recite to my recapture file? And I've heard that people at the BBL are monstrous beasts with beady eyes, and now I need help. Do you think I'll be safe talking to them? The answer to that one is yes, but we'll keep going. Okay, so let's start with permits. Oftentimes we hear that to get a master permit, you have to have apprenticed for years, working your way up as a volunteer and then a sub-permittee, and then finally you get to be a master permit holder. And I want to dispel that myth right away. While yes, you do need to have experience and be able to prove that you can safely handle your study species, you don't need to follow this dogged path of working your way up to get a master permit. You need bird handling experience, specifically with the species you would like to study or a comparative species. You need to provide a banding CV. That's not the same as a job CV. I don't care that you worked at Staples once upon a time when you were a teenager. This is just your banding CV. Provide references that can attest to your skills, and you need to have a scientific purpose. A question that can be answered through bird banding techniques. And I will also say that that project needs to be different than other permits who might be doing the same work. You either have to be in a different location, working on a different species. Otherwise, it might be more advantageous to be a sub on someone else's permit. Once you have a permit, it's your responsibility to follow through with the directives of that permit and to perform the tasks required to keep it. What does that mean? It means you need to report all of your bandings to the BBL. And yes, that even means informing us if a band was lost, if a band was destroyed. Those all count, or just the record was lost. Those all count as bandings because those records are associated with a specific band number. So we need to keep track of every band number. So even if you didn't use it in the field, like I said, lost or destroyed, you still need to report. You need to keep on top of renewals and modifications for your permit. And you need to respond to emails from us answering the questions we might have regarding your data. That means making sure your authorizations are up to date and that they actually match what you're doing in the field, whether that's the species, the location, or the auxiliary marking. And that's a really important one. Especially for you guys, because I know that you use them a lot. So This means that if you're using blue auxiliary markers on your birds, you need to make sure that the authorization on your permit reflects that. Why? Why is this so important? Well, here's an example. You've banded an albatross with a blue leg band and code XXX, or insert whatever marker you're currently using for your own scenario. And you finished the field season. So you haven't finished your field season, so you haven't submitted yet. But John Doe from the public has now spotted your bird on a pelagic and reported it to the BBL. Well, if we don't know that you're using blue auxiliary leg bands, we don't even know to email you to get the data for this bird. Without finding a band number, we cannot match the report to a specific bird and to your permit. And so that report gets marked as deleted, and you might never get it. We're more likely to pair it with a band number if your authorization accurately reflects what you're doing in the field. Additionally, if we can't pair a report to a bird, reporters are less likely to report a second time. Speaking of data, yes, we want all the data. This is different than in the past, as some of the older permit holders might remember. Back in 2005, we switched our database structure, and we now have the capability to hold all sorts of data safely. So yes, we do want your banding data. And we also want your recapture data and encounters from the public, that especially ones that were reported to you, but they weren't reported to us. And I'll explain the difference between what we call encounters and recaptures in a later slide. I do want to point out that recapture records, while not required, some of them should be treated as if they are banding records, and you should submit them. And I'm specifically speaking about auxiliary marker changes, especially when they're not associated with a metal band change, because those go on your recapture Excel template, they don't come in as bandings, and those are really important. If you recapture a bird that already has a metal band and you add an auxiliary marker or change the auxiliary marker or remove the auxiliary marker, if you don't inform us, we won't be able to pair any future resites to that metal band. Think of them as banding records. Our database works by having the original metal band as the bird's primary key. So if we can't relate data back to that original band number, reports get lost. And they don't get added to your data set. And we could lose out on more resightings from the public. And again, speaking of data, it's not just important to make sure that you're getting the data to us, but that you're getting it to us as quickly as possible. Now, I know that field seasons are busy. Believe me, I understand having a lot to do on your list. But getting those data to the BBL sooner rather than later is actually less work in the long run and has additional benefits besides. There's this sort of trickle down effect that happens when data doesn't come in regularly. And I've already mentioned a little bit, but a recite comes in, we don't have the banding yet, especially when they're recited aux markers. And, we want to add them, but we might not be able to. So, we have this whole train of emails trying to find out who the bird belongs to. We have to hunt it down. We send an email asking if it's yours. You say no, but we've had to wait for this reply. And now we have to find another person to send an email to. And in the meantime, we've received an email from the finder asking where their certificate is. And so we got to reply to them that we don't have it yet. And if we never get an answer of whose bird this is, the permit holder never gets the recite report and the finder never gets a certificate. And all of that time could be eliminated, all those back and forth emails, if the data was submitted early and often. It also prevents up for banding records and delinquent data popping up on your portal. I recommend getting into the habit of, checking and cleaning each day's data at the end of the day and submitting weekly, monthly. And I know some of that's a little bit out of your ability, but definitely by the end of the season. As some of you know, the templates, they only hold 3,000 records. So it might be easier to submit smaller data sets more regularly than rather than having to break up this larger data set into chunks for submission. And before you ask, we have a limit of 3,000 because we found that testing the Banner portal that the larger files, they bog down the system, cause the upload to crash. And unfortunately, that's not something we have control over. That's a government piece on like the larger government's end. So, you know, we're working within the government parameters. So I personally even recommend even smaller files, more often smaller files. And that also helps you when you're in the portal, cleaning up those errors that come through too. So, you know, rather than submitting a larger chunk and having to pick through all the errors and then finally, you know, sending it off to us. So let's talk about those terms that I mentioned earlier, recapture and encounter. We've also got foreign recapture, returns, repeats, recites. I know that in the field, these terms have specific meanings and can even mean something slightly different depending on where you're from or who you've worked with or what you're studying. So I want to clarify that those terms, what they mean to us here at the BBL, and point out that for us, most of those terms are obsolete. So let's start with the definition of an encounter. It's a recite of a live bird, a recovery of a dead bird, or just a band found on its own, but reported by the general public, not associated with a permit or a specific study. These reports generally come in from reportban.gov. And because we believe these reports to be from the public, we don't ask for data like we would of a permitted bander. So, for example, there's no age or sex associated with an encounter. Encounter reports produce certificates of appreciation with the original banding details for the reporter. Recaptures, on the other hand, are provided by a permitted bander. The term recapture encompasses recites, returns, repeats, recoveries, etc. A bander does not have to have a bird in hand to call it a recapture. You just have to use the correct how obtained code. So recited a color marker only. It's number 29. Recaptures are have more information than encounters, like age, sex, demography, measurements, status codes, and so on. Previously with Bandit, banders had to note the difference between a recapture of their own bird or a foreign recapture, meaning the recapture of a bird that was not banded by your permit. For submission purposes, now that the portal has been launched, that distinction is obsolete. We understand that if a bird is not yours, you might want to obtain the original banding data, and you can access that through the portal using either the band history link or through a data pull. And you do receive emails from us with these data. I think they're sent out every Saturday, but don't quote me on that one. Unfortunately, a recapture does not produce a certificate of appreciation. And I know that a lot of people would like that to happen. So we do have that on our hopefully fix one day list so that it's there, we know about it. And we would also ask that you try to not submit your recaptures as encounters if possible, because like I said, it contains more data and it's associated with your permit. If you submit a recapture or your permits data as an encounter, it's not that easy to see on the portal, because if you submit it as an encounter, it's linked to the email address of the submittee. So if you're logging into the portal as a sub permit or as a master even, depending on who submitted the encounter, you might not be able to see it because it is only available to the exact address that it was submitted to. But if you submit it as a recapture, you can always see it in the portal because it's linked to the permit and not to the email address. Speaking of foreign recaptures, unfortunately, one of the things we see quite often here at the bird banding lab is adding bands or removing auxiliary markers or adding auxiliary markers, and sometimes even removing the original metal band of birds they recaptured that are not theirs. And this can be problematic. And we request that you don't do it. There is a caveat, I'll get to it in a minute. Well, why? Well, you might affect the outcome of another bird study, such as survival rates or reporting rates. You could affect the results of another study, or you could cause the bird to be completely removed from another person's study's data set. It overly complicates a bird's banding history, and keeping track of what markers are on the bird at any given time can be even more complicated, and in turn then complicates future reports and potential resightings. And who is the original bander or the new bander? Who gets that information? Obtaining the banding data from the original bander might not be that easy, especially if it's from a foreign country, and tracking down the original bander might be very difficult. The long and short of it is you don't know what you don't know about the study being done on that bird, and it's best to just leave it as it is. Make a note of the recapture and release the bird unchanged, and obviously report it. Gone are the days of bling it and fling it. As a bander, you need to make conscious choices about the science that you're conducting and how you're affecting other science. Now, we understand that sometimes changes to the bird status might even be called for and welcome, such as if the band is unreadable, making the bird unidentifiable, the band is damaged, it doesn't fit right, it's injuring the bird, or perhaps you work with another permit, or you're taking over the colony of another now inactive permit. We understand that working together makes that possible. But in general, we recommend not altering the bird. One of the most important aspects of bird banding data is the resulting data that comes from it. And it's using and sharing those data that make sound scientific advancements and make our work important. And with that said, I know that there are many different entities vying for those data, and we think it's important that you share with each and every one of them. You should share with your working group because you have an obligation to your partners, and those groups have specific goals and objectives. The same is true for bandedbirds.org and the entire shorebird community. And of course, for us, the NABBP, it's part of your permit obligation. But also, those data would join a much larger and richer data set that has been used and will be used in ways that differ from these other groups. All of these groups I mentioned, we do share data and we try and work together, but the current methods are not always efficient. And so time is wasted with some back and forth communications. And sometimes one or more groups, they only get pieces of the data instead of the entire thing. And we are working to streamline communications and data sharing, but it's slow moving. So it only benefits you if you get ahead of the problem and submit to all the places that you need to. Write an SOP and get in the habit of, at the end of every season, checking off the boxes that you've sent the data to the right people. And feel free to let these other entities know that sharing data, they can do that and that it's important. But what I'd like to leave you with for this part of the presentation is that we're approachable and we're always seeking partnerships. We want to see your work succeed and we want to help you further avian science. And we're talking small scale or large scale. Do you have questions for us? Do you need help? Do you want to make a modification, but you don't know how to proceed? We're here to help. We are few, but we try to reply quickly and thoroughly. And we'd love to help partner with you and if you have something larger in mind. We have done this with the albatross. We cleaning and curating 1.5 million records. We're working with you guys, the Roseate Terns. We're working with American oyster catchers to try and complete data sets and get everything up to date. We provide data. We've consulted with Audubon as they built their Bird Migration Explorer. We provide yearly data pulls to the flyways, aid them in conservation and management. So ultimately, we are looking to help our partners, and we are here and willing and available to help. So that's it for this part of the slide, but I did want to give everybody a little bit of a super quick update on Roseate Tern data. I've been working with Jeff Spindelow, and we've updated a lot of our knowledge here at the BBL of the foreign banded birds from Brazil, and having those color markers and metal pairings has been amazing. Peter Patton gave us all of his foreign banded resites just a little while ago. They are now entered and in the data set. So we have some stuff for Great Gull Island. I'm not sure where the others are in terms of having their data submitted for this year, but I want to encourage you to go back, please, and look through some of your older data just to make sure that we have the auxiliary marker and metal band pairing, because if we don't, we can't add data. So please make sure that those data come to us. And if you haven't submitted for the end of the season yet, please get on top of that. We would love to have that stuff in there so that we have a much clearer picture of everything that where we are up to date to now. So that's it for me. I'm gonna stop sharing. You can ask questions.
All right, thanks, Jen. That was a powerful talk. Anyone have any questions or comments or any data they want to submit in the chat? Just kidding.
I'm here to answer other questions too, not just ones that came up in the chat. If you have other questions as well. I don't want anybody to be scared of us, and I want people to get data into us, and I want to make it easy for everybody.
That is awesome. I think I do have a question about batch resites and how we deal with that. And maybe I was a little distracted during your talk. If you specifically said that, I was trying to listen, but there was so much good info.
No, I don't. I didn't specifically talk about that. So if you want to rephrase it and give me a.
Yeah. So a couple of things. Some birds of some species, and maybe not roseate terns that much, but so 2 questions. What do you do with birds that only have auxiliary bands? Does BBL care at all? And then number 2, if we have a big amount of resites, and I'm sure the colony managers already know this, but maybe some people like me don't, how would we report those instead of individually reporting each resite?
Yeah, so well, first things first, when you did mention auxiliary marker only, it brought up something else. Back in the day, there used to be this rule where, like, if you banded a chick, but it died within 90 days, not to give us the data, but to mark that band as destroyed and send it in that way. That's not something we do anymore. That is not a thing. Give us the data and then tell us the data, and then have the death report as a recapture or a recovery. Because even those data are important. Like, when we said that way back when, it's because we didn't have the capacity to hold those data. We do now, and we know that those data are important. Okay, for auxiliary marker only birds, usually they originally had a band, usually. And so even though they're not carrying the metal band anymore, we can link it back to that metal band and to that individual. If it's only carrying an ox and has ever only been carrying an ox, that is something we try to avoid. Well, depending on the species, there are like some plovers that only ever carry just color bands, and we have those are like separate. But I know you guys as a Roseate Tern and common tern group tend to put coded. So we try not to do that. But if you have done it, it's best to try to recapture that bird, put a metal band on it. And even if you don't, or you can't get to it, give us the data anyway. We do have like little resources where we put pockets of the information somewhere so that when recites come in, at least we can say, you know, oh, that's not in our database, but here's the banding information and here's the contact for, you know, and then at least get you those reports. And then, I'm sorry, what was the next question?
No, that's
There was
good.
one more.
I think just the batch uploading.
Oh yeah, batch uploads. Yeah, so and you know, it's funny because the albatross have this too. They recite, you know, those birds, they're in plots and they're there all winter long, and they're recited once a week. And we do want those records. But if you don't want to share that many records, I think the things that are most important are like when you first saw them, when you last saw them. Those dates are important. And also, just as an example, you know, we get a recite in, and we're like, oh, okay, here's ML1. Great. I only have banding data. This bird has never been seen, and it's 12 years old, and I'm not sure that that's really a legitimate report. Come to find out, you guys have the data that's shown that it's been seen in the same, you know, colony every year since the year it was banded. But for us, it's a sketchy report because we don't have that historical view. And so sometimes, you know, then we have to go back to the finder and be like, take a picture because I'm not sure that this is right. And so, you know, data could get thrown out if we don't have that data to look back on ourselves, you know, because we're trying to verify and vet legitimate data. And we know you don't want garbage, but at the same time, if we don't have the information, we can't give it to you, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but we wouldn't upload recites the same way we would recaptures, right?
Yes, you would. In the same template, you just would put code 29, which is I saw the auxiliary marker only. But
Okay.
then you do have to provide us the metal band number, even though we know you didn't see it. That 29 code tells us that you only saw the aux marker, but you do have to have a metal band to submit. Yeah.
Okay, I will. Thank you. That is helpful. I'll move on to let Jeff ask questions.
Wasn't so much a question as a suggestion, Jennifer, that you tell them about what happens when things go into the marker hold file and what it takes to get them out of there.
Yeah, so poor Jeff, he's on our hit list of people to just like constantly send these random reports to. So that was kind of what I was referring to in the talk, is that auxiliary markers, because that's what they can see. They don't tend to report the band number. And so sometimes, and especially if they don't send us pictures, it makes it even harder. But sometimes, you know, codes are hard to read, colors are fading. And so hunting down what bird it might be is oftentimes a very arduous task. And, you know, especially if we don't have the marker data. Like if you guys put out RL1 and we don't know you've ever put RL1 out, hunting that down, I mean, these things take forever. It's funny because, you know, people are like, why can't you just get to this stuff and get it done quickly? And it's like, well, this one bird took me like 5 weeks to figure out whose bird it even was. You know, so yeah, we send a lot to Jeff, obviously, so that he can we're like, do you know who did this bird, like by any chance? So poor Jeff gets a lot of the brunt of our questioning, only because he sits right upstairs from us, just so you know.
I just wanted to quickly introduce myself. I'm Lauren Walker. I'm also with the Banding Lab. And to kind of chime in on what Jen just said with the marker hold file, it's sometimes we can't match reports at all, but also it can lead to mismatched reports because we don't always get photos, and sometimes folks report dark blue bands as black or as dark green or like something that's close enough. But if there's another bird out there with that same code on a black band instead of a dark blue band, like we could completely match the report to the wrong band number. And if we don't know that there's both a dark blue band and a black band out there with that same code, it's really easy just to like go through and mismatch reports as well. So another layer of
Yeah.
trouble that we get ourselves into.
I'm seeing a lot of questions still coming in. Would there be a riot if we skipped our break? Would everyone survive that, or do people like? If you're against that, I don't want to take it away from everyone. It's only been an hour since we've been back. Okay, since Margaret said yes for everyone, then we will skip our break and keep going. We'll keep this conversation going for another 5 minutes until 3:15. And I believe Lindsay has her hand up next.
Hey, thanks. I have a question as regards obtaining coordinates for recaptures of birds that were not recaptured physically, but just seen while wild and free, because that's data. The coordinates of where the bird was seen is very important for the oyster catcher people, and it's something of interest for the skimmers. So I don't want to lose that data. And so how can we get coordinates in when reporting what we've seen as a recapture? And that might be like
Yeah, so encounters come in from the public and they have pinpoint coordinates. So and then it gives you like if you're getting those reports back, it's got you know, exact or centroid of the area, or county level or state level. So it tells you the coordinate precision. For recaptures, generally you're seeing those in the colonies that you are also banding in, and so those recaptures would be submitted using the location, the locations that you have associated with that permit, and those locations are on your portal with the coordinates already there. If it's not your bird, then in a data pull, the coordinates are available. They come in the data pull, or I think you can also see them in the band history link. So, but if you just have to, there's a tab for data, not data submission, the other one, the other tab, I can't think of the name of it right now. But that's where you get all your data back from us. So you can see it and pull it, and it comes out in an Excel file. So, and it's got, lat longs available.
But like if I'm using the template, which I really prefer to Bandit, I very much like using it. I don't have fields for lat long.
Right. If it's your permit, then you're putting in the code for that location, and that location exists as a table on the portal for coordinates. Yeah, you would have to put it in and then pull it back to actually have the file with the coordinates on it. So you have to submit it and then pull it back out to get the coordinates.
So, but if we're resighting birds away from colonies, like we do a lot of resighting away from the breeding site, so we can't my locations don't represent where we're resighting birds. They, in their entirety. And this might be like a special question for certain situations, but like I'll go to a completely different county, say, and recite birds while they're non-breeding. And so,
but
I know where those coordinates are, but I can't pass them out to other people and to you through that template. And so that's just something I've been thinking about, and I think it's important to be able to capture that somehow.
Yep, I've got two options.
Are these places that you like regularly visit to recite birds, or is it kind of just randomly you might come across them?
It's a mix. So some are like where we do ISS surveys, and like sometimes they're on that shoal or sometimes they're on that side of the inlet versus the other. So we put the coordinates where the bird is, like, kind of like this is exactly where the bird is. And for, like with the black skimmers, it's interesting to be able to say, oh, well, you could say, oh, they're at Mason Inlet. But what's interesting is, well, they tend to be on the one side of the inlet, which is a private island that people can't just go to and walk around on. They have to be very special and own a house there or have a friend that gave them a pass. And so you can kind of see patterns of distribution in kind of a micro scale based on, levels of disturbance, based on different levels of access. So that type of information, we're capturing now.
So it
and I'd
could
like to be able to
that,
continue to do so.
Yeah, so that level of precision in the coordinates is important to you guys and maybe not as much to us. So maybe for the data, if you want to be able to submit it to us in the recapture template, you have a location in your portal for like that shoal, that island, whatever it is. And then you can just submit all those kind of as a more like watered down precision level, if that simplifies things.
Yeah, the two options I was thinking of is that you create the location for your permit for that location. Or depending on how many, if there's only like one or two in these other random spots, you can submit as encounters. It's just preferential that you submit as a recapture.
Okay, because
So-
I want to give you the bulk of our data in the way that you want it, but I also want to make sure, and I want to make sure that other people, like when I get a reciting of my birds, it's good to get that same, reasonable level of precision in the coordinates for other people that might be doing similar work, like on ISSs or just randomly, going to their site to check on their rat surveillance and discovering, oh, look, it's an oyster catcher or a skimmer or a tern, So I think kind of understanding that is going to be important for people.
Yeah.
All right, it looks like there's a ton more questions in the chat. If Jen and Lauren, if you don't mind checking those out, I can also try to collect questions and email you guys and then get it back to the group. So we can go all these options.
Lauren and I will put our email addresses in the chat. Feel free to send us any questions you have, whatever. I've also uploaded my presentation to the Google thing, so you feel free to share that. There's also a similar version that we have on our website that you can go back and listen to again. It's also me talking. So all the options are there. You got all the stuff.
Perfect. Thank you so much. This was really helpful. All right. Let's move on to the Roseate Tern non-breeding studies session. It's going to be led by John Herbert. And John, just like late breaking information, Jeff said he's willing to give a short presentation. Maybe not a PowerPoint, but he's willing to kick it off.
Sorry.
And so we'll just keep going as we're going. We can bleed everything down. We'll give everyone the full amount of time that they need, and we can just take away some time from other topics for discussion at the end.
That sounds good. All right, Jeff, if you're ready to go, we'll start with your presentation.
Yeah. First of all, I'd like to apologize for not being able to put together a decent talk. Unfortunately, I got COVID right after Thanksgiving and haven't been functioning at 100%. But I did want to present a few things real quickly. Number one is that a 2-year-old bird was banded as a roseate, that is banded as a chick up in eastern Egg Rock a couple years ago, was spotted as the first state record for this species out in Ohio this spring. And in the course of correspondence about this, I made the offhand remark about, I know 2-year-olds like to wander, but I doubt I will see it on Cape Cod this year. And I've now had to eat my words. The bird found its way back to the Atlantic coast. Apparently it didn't get back up into the Gulf of Maine. I just got their records and it wasn't listed there, but I saw it 4 days in a row up on the Cape. And the other thing I just wanted to say is that I read more than 2,000 roseate and common tern bands up on Cape Cod this year. And one of those birds now presents, again, a new age record. We have a 29-year-old roseate spotted this year, originally banded as a chick by Ian Nisbet and his crew back on Bird Island. Like I said, I'm sorry, my voice still isn't very strong now, so I'm just going to cut out. I'll answer questions via the chat.
Sounds good. Well, that got us right back on track.
Do we have any questions for Jeff? I just sent Hafa a message. I don't see him on right now. So wait for Hafa to join for the next talk until then. If it doesn't join, we can
Okay.
we can start
You're-
non-breeding
You're
conversation.
cutting out a little bit, John.
I'm cutting out. Is that better?
Not really. A little bit. Oh, I see Hoffa.
Sorry, I couldn't understand really well if John Hubbard was calling me or not because they're cutting. So let me try to share my screen here.
All right, can you hear me now, Allison?
Yeah, it sounds
yeah, it's
great
back.
now.
All right, I did a quick reset. All right, so we'll start our next talk. Rafa will be talking about his project studying the power line collisions in Brazil. Really exciting. So, Rafa, it's all yours.
Okay, can you hear me now? Yeah.
Yep.
Can you see my screen?
Yep, looks good.
Oh, great. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rafael Reboredo. I work in Brazil for SEMMON, a non-profit organization dedicated to environmental monitoring and conservation. I'm also a PhD student at the Federal University of Rio Grande do Norte, UFRN. So today I will share key findings from our project that aims to reduce the highest known mortality rate of adult roseate terns in the Americas that we know by now. So let's see. This project, even led by SEMMON in Brazil, it's the result of close collaboration with various partners and contributors, which I have tried to summarize here. The project was originally called the Tern Protection Project, but we renamed it as Aves do Mar, Birds of the Sea in Portuguese, to better connect with the local coastal communities in Brazil. So I've been presenting updates on this project at the same meeting since 2021. But to provide some context for today's discussions, let's briefly review the project timeline and key milestones on that. So the project began with the identification of bird collisions along a power line during daily monitoring by the PCCB Beach Monitoring Program. PCCB has been active since 2020, searching for stranded marine animals impacted by oil exploitation as part of Brazil's mandatory environmental compliance measures to the industry keep their activities. It's one of the biggest beach monitoring programs in the world right now. So during this monitoring, over 40 birds carrying BBL bands from the US, New York, Massachusetts, and Maine were found, and prompting an international collaboration to address this issue. And this led to our 2020 funding application to the State of Birds funding, which was approved in 2021, allowing us to develop monitoring protocol and install markers as a mitigation measure in Brazil. So in 2022, we installed markers and initiated the first year of beach powerline monitoring. During this time, the local community alerted us to collisions in a nearby road, prompting to additional off-road monitoring to our efforts. That year, we also executed a pilot telemetry study on roseate terns in partnership with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And we secured funding from Environmental Climate Change Canada to continue our work for 2 more years. In 2023, we implemented change in the marker distribution. We began a daily road monitoring, and we completed the second year of the beach monitoring. So now, this year marked our third year of beach monitoring, of the beach power line monitoring, and the second year of the road line daily monitoring. We also advanced discussions on the road line marking, and we conducted new telemetry studies with GPS technology, as you saw earlier this morning during Keenan's and John Hubbard's amazing presentations. I will outline the initial definitions and methodologies applied to this project. The monitored area is in Galinhos, a peninsular municipality in Rio Grande do Norte state. The power line connects two urban communities and traverses the beach parallel to the dunes, as you can see here in the map. So connect to these red urban areas. So the power line has been placed since 1982. In the picture, you can see to the left is the sea, and while coastal wind farms established between 2013 and 2014 are visible here in the background. And the right side, we can see the dunes formation. We installed bird fly diverters from Powerline Sentry. These were deployed either from the ground or with a bucket truck, depending on the site accessibility. And we did two marking scams were implemented. So a denser configuration one, called heavy marking, applied just to the lateral lines. So with a three-phase power line. And a standard pattern using a V-shape arrangement, less dense. So the marking scheme was distributed in paired blocks on 8 different sectors for SATS application. And the daily monitoring was conducted during the birds' migratory season in the region, January to April, using an ATV along 4 transects covering the entire wide of the beach. After the first year, we observed a higher collision rate in 2 consecutive treatment sectors. And this led us to adjust the marker placement to address potential spatial bias, having alternated treatment configuration from 2023 to present time. So as I said in the introduction, in the first year, we started to investigate also a road line, which gained priority after a single event in which 17 roseate terns, 2 red knots, and 2 goo-billed terns were found in one day. So daily monitoring on the road began in 2023 to better understand this spot and the risks in this area. And this road power line is located between evaporation ponds of a salt company. Here in the right side, you can see this. All this area is an evaporation pond, and shrimp farms in the left side. So this is the area really frequented by marine and shorebirds due to high food and roost sites availability in this area. And you can see the road crosses just in the middle with the power line. Leading energy to this small port that we have here to crosses in a ferry to Galinhos urban area. So after 3 years of monitoring, we consolidate some important results that provide some insights into collision dynamics and mitigation effectiveness that I will show you now. And I will start with the 2024 results, and after that, I will compare the data across these years. So in 2024, 9 birds collided with the beach line, including 4 roseate terns And also the community notifications also reported 2 debilitated birds found nearby, but apparently not affected by collisions. In standard treatment areas. However, the standard treatment in sectors 3 and 7 had higher numbers, similar to previous years, as I will show you soon in the comparison. And for each year, we estimated mortality with the number of birds found within the designated treatment areas, splitting a buffer zone. And we corrected by carcass persistence rates and search efficiency of the team, which were measured through a specific tests. For 2024, the estimated mortality was 9.5 birds, aligning closely with the observed numbers, and a significantly higher number were observed in the standard treatment. So on the road line in 2024, we found 18 birds near to the road line, including marine birds, shorebirds, passerines, and others. The others, however, only 10 animals could be confirmed as resulting from collisions. The others lacked sufficient evidence or had to be run over by cars on the road, becoming really disfigured, so we couldn't point collision causes. So, thus, using 10 animals definitely attributed to collisions, it was possible to calculate a mortality rate of 70.36 birds caused by the line in the first 4 months of 2024. So now comparing the data across these 3 years, for the beach power line, we observed that the estimated mortality compared to the number of birds found each year is very close, highlighting that the current monitoring format has been successful in closely approximating the actual number of birds collisions. We also observed that March stands out with the highest number of collisions, especially for roseate terns, coinciding with the onset of their breeding migration. We also observed annual variation in the number of birds collisions. So regarding the marker treatment, it is clear from the data that the effect of the treatment location is greater than the effect of the treatment itself. So in 2023, after altering the position of the heavy and the standard treatments in sector 3 and 4, the number of collisions in these areas remained higher. And finally, focusing solely on roseate tern data, we observed a reduction of over 90% in bird collisions in years with markers compared to the years with birds found by the PCCB Beach Monitoring Project. And it's important to note that since the data was collected differently with distinct monitoring efforts, we needed to calculate a scaling factor to allow for data comparison. And who has interest on and how we did that, I would be happy to share after that. But also other statistical analysis indicated a significant reduction in the number of bird collisions after the installation of the markers. And the road line had a similar number of birds found each year, even in the first year when it was monitored every other day for only 2 months, half the time of subsequent years. We found really close numbers between these years. indicating a really variation along the years too. So the number of species also varied considerably in the road line, with some species occurring in certain years and others not. And we changed the groups of the species too, between passerines, raptors, parakeets, but especially the highest number was shorebirds and marine birds and seabirds and terns, especially terns. So some future directions for this project. In 2025, we plan to mark the entire road line and expand GPS telemetry research. This will enhance our understanding of local Roseate Tern dynamics and emerging threats. The main bottleneck, as with many projects here, remains funding. With the arrival of new collaborators and partners such as Avangrid, National Audubon, the Aquasis, and the UFRN Ornithology Laboratory, we have been able to make some new progresses. However, for this immense migratory scale project, any new collaboration is crucial. Thank you for your attention. I'm happy to answer any questions or discuss ideas for future collaboration and project improvement. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hapa. Really great. I didn't see any questions in the chat, so if somebody.
Yeah, this is Doug Forsell. Can you hear me?
Go ahead. We can hear you. Go ahead.
Yeah, how much would it cost to underground or put those through conduit along the roadside and get rid of them altogether? It seems like a really good mitigation thing that one of the wind companies could just say, well, we're going to throw some money at that right now instead of waiting 10 years for the government to come around and decide to do it.
Yeah, this would be the best solutions. We have been having the approach of really open dialogue with the energy company here to find the best ways as possible to try to mitigate this problem. And of course, the first idea that appeared from us was to put underground power line. But it was not possible, especially for the beach line has some difficulties because it's in a dune area with a lot of changing and modifications, and the line could be exposed. There's some car traffic in this area too. So the power line put themselves as argumenting about that. And also the economic factor pointed to not be a first solution that we could take for the beach power line. So we suggested and we applied the marking scans there. And the road power line, we did the same approach. We started a conversation asking to the power line company to study the possibility to put underground. But the solution that they pointed was to try to marker this power line and to test again how these markers works to the power line and to the road power line after going to other solutions as put in underground.
Did I guess my question was how much, not how, you know, how much somebody didn't want to pay for it, but if somebody gave you $1 million, could it be done? Or what, you know, is it a matter that, oh, that would cost us too much to do it, or that it's not impractical, but undoable? And
yeah, I don't have this amount. I don't know, my knowledge limitations. didn't permit to put a number here, but definitely it could be a possibility based on the setting of the area. But in the end, it's power line decision, the power line company decision, and we couldn't force more than that we already asked it for, and this open dialogue that we have. And after that, it would be to try by mandatory and licensing way. So this is a distribution line, and distribution lines doesn't pass by licensing in Brazil, just transmissions lines. So the environmental agencies do not need to ask mitigation measurements for measures to distribution lines. So we need to start a really big change and the way that this could be seen by the environmental agents. And we start a dialogue with the local environmental agencies to request more compensation and in the new distribution power line that could be close to the coast, especially in this region of the state. But the dialogue is a little bit more complicated than that.
Thanks.
Joan, you had something to add?
Yeah, Hafa, wasn't there also a challenge with the dunes having some protection? So Doug, we explored that at the very beginning. And one of the big stopping points was also that the dunes were protected. There's another piece here, which is that this could be happening at many places along the coast, which is why the telemetry project was also part of this work, was to find out where there were other roost sites that may have power lines in front of them, as well as shrimp ponds behind them or salt works behind them. And you can't bury every power line on the coast of Brazil. So this experiment, I think what it has shown us is that the bird flight diverters by power line sentry with a 90% reduction, 92% reduction is really a cost-effective way of being able to take this on. In the chat, someone has a comment that it was really the data prior to the application that Samam was already collecting that gives us this great data stream of really seeing the reduction in the collisions. So I really have to hand it to this team for being able to recognize the scale of what was going on and then coming up with a solution involving industry and getting it done. It's been a very elegant project that worked really well.
Yeah, Samam. Yeah, leadership by Samam to address this mitigation. I mean, this threat has been remarkable. I think I have Sarah is next, and then Atma. Sarah, you have a question?
Great talk and excellent work. I was wondering about the other main mortality was through a lot of car collisions. So I was wondering if there's been any communication about that with some of the people that use the road often.
So yeah, one of the biggest confusions in the data from the road power line is to identify if the birds are injured by cars or collisions power line, and we have been just confirming collisions if we see a lot of some signs as the type of injury in the bird, and when we crosses with the ecology of the birds and the possibility of diverting from their line or colliding. But cars running over, it's a possibility in the area. And we started, so when we started this project and in the area, we started also a lot of environmental sensibilization with the community. and to talk with people. So usually in the beginning of the season, in the end of the season, we visit schools and we talk with the fishermen that lives in the area. And so Galinhos is a really small municipality with just less than 3,000 people living there. And so everybody knows everybody, and everybody knows what is happening in both power lines. So the community is really conscient about that, and because of that, we discovered this new threat, this problem in the road power line. It was by community that we discovered that. So, but also Galinhos has a lot of touristic activity. It's a place that a lot of people that is not from Rio Grande Norte State or even from the city goes. So we are studying the possibility of installing some advisements in the road, asking for slow the velocity of the cars and pointing to animals crossing the roads, and to educate better outside of the city people, outside of the town people that comes to Galinhos. Did I answer your question?
Yes, you definitely answered it. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Hey, I'll jump in. Thanks, Hapa, so much. Really appreciate the presentation and all the great work. And again, the communication is really amazing. Like the way you're presenting it is really clear, which is difficult sometimes. I guess I just wondered if you have any interest in expanding this work to the roof red knots as well. And I noticed that 2 roof red knots were found on the road power line, and wondering if they have the same vulnerability to collisions with these coastal power lines as roseates.
So yeah, we had during this 3 years of monitoring, I think just these 2 red knots in the first year, and I think we had 1 red knot last year. So this area became this year in Brazil a Western site. Is one of the 4 Western Hemisphere importance sites, local sites for shorebirds. So this area is recognized as a really important area also for shorebirds. However, so we are monitoring the line and we are seeing any bird that collides. The main comparisons here that I did, it was with roseate terns and terns, because it's the highest number of birds that collide with the beach power line is basically terns, common terns and roseate terns. We had like just really few events of other birds colliding, but for the road power line we had a lot of different species colliding too. So any bird that will be colliding should be so the marking should work to avoid the collision. And we intend to test that in the next years after marking the road power line, because the diversity of the species colliding there is bigger. And so we will understand if the mark is will be working for some species and other not. So we need to monitor and see what happens. We already know that for terns works really well, because in the beach power line basically terns was colliding. But we don't know for the other species, and we will discover it with the monitoring.
Great, thanks.
Hey, Rafa, how you doing? Caleb Spiegel, good to see you. I have a question about the remaining. It's a really good rate that you're getting of reduction. I'm wondering if you've looked at or have any thoughts on the ones that are still colliding. Are there any variables that you've seen that may explain those areas, or maybe it's a time of day, or any ideas about what's going on there with the ones that are still colliding, and why that might be happening?
So as the sampling is really small, some statistic tests are quite difficult to incorporate some covariates, but by empirical observation, we already know that. So we already know that this local bias, this site bias exists. So we see that in the ending and the beginning of this power line, it's more critical areas. So probably because it's a place that birds are using more to cross to the beach area and come back to the roosting sites or go to the river side of the peninsula. And we already know that the most part, basically almost all the collisions happens in the first early hours of the morning between 4:30 morning and 6 a.m. So it's a little bit, the sun is arriving and the sun rises in the sea. So it's against of the vision of the terns that are coming from roosting sites from the riverside and going to the sea. So this could cause some visual obfuscating a little bit. The marking scheme, even being marked, could be still obfuscating a little bit the terns. But it's a really deep analysis that we need to affirm that. But basically, and last year we also had an event of a mass collisions after a night of a lot of wind. So we had 5 terns that collided in the same area after a really windy night. So this covariates points to some wind events could be highlighting a little bit the number of birds colliding, could be influentiating, and the early morning are more critical. The first time of the morning are more critical for collisions, and also this location. We have a big reduction of collisions in the middle of the power line compared to the other years. I didn't go deep in this location data here, but apparently remains these 2 spots in the sides and in the early morning. So this is still more critical.
If that's interesting, that makes a lot of sense, actually. Thanks.
You're welcome. So Julie has a question here in the chat. So these markers has reflective stripes that in the early morning already start to reflect a little bit the sunlight, and also has a glowing stripe that in the first time of the night is still glowing, even the dusk a little bit. But a UV lighting, we never tried to use in this holes. I know some research that have been using to avoid birds and oil rigs. There's some discussions about lasers and lights affecting some vision of the birds. So the answer is no. We didn't consider by now using UV lights in the lines. Could be a possibility. I will be completely open to talk about that and maybe try new potential ways to avoid the collisions of the remaining birds that's still colliding with the line.
Welcome. All right. I don't see any more questions for Hafa. We have a couple minutes left in this session if we want to continue talking about non-breeding. Well, I guess with Hafa on the lines, and a big part of this was growing an international coalition, and we're looking to continue that. Hafa, from your perspective, I'm interested in what's worked well from your end, building partnerships, and what do you think can improve?
Yeah, so this is a fantastic question, actually. I think nothing of that would be possible without a migration-wide coalition alliance perspective between different organizations. We had a lot of effort of different organizations here in Brazil, and a lot of effort of the organizations in the United States and also Canada. So if we are dealing with a migratory species, we need, as you already introduced it in your presentation in the morning, we are dealing with a migratory species that has a lot of part of the time in another country, and we need to also improve conservation measures and now migratory scale. So this cooperation between a lot of countries and people makes this possible, and make us to increase, to boost the knowledge about the birds in the area really quickly and really fast. In just 3 years, we didn't know anything about the Roseate Tern dynamic in the northeast part of Brazil, especially in Rio Grande do Norte state by now. So, and now we know a lot about collisions, about threats. We initiate advocacy with the environmental agents to look better to the power line, to energy industry in the coast. And we discovered more roost sites that we didn't know before. And also we are now understanding. So, and this was just possible because of this cooperation between all these groups. It's not a only one institution work, and I'm glad to be a representative of all this effort, but I'm talking in name of everybody that is doing that happens. So work together, we go far when we do that.
That's great, Hava. Thank you very much. I think we're. I don't know, Allison, if you want to keep going, or go to the next session.
Yeah, I think it seems like we're at a good stopping point right here, and there hopefully should be some time at the end if people think of more things to talk about on the wintering grounds, which there are lots. Thank you so much, John, Hafa, and Jeff for presenting. That was really a great ending to it too. I appreciate all the hard work that you guys have put in. I mean, it's just amazing. Like you said, Hafa, how much has been done in 3 years to really make a huge impact for the species. So thank you all that are involved. Continuing a little bit on the lines of non-breeding work, we have Henry Woolley, sorry if I said your name wrong, who would like to present an RFI habitat use map for roseate terns and get everyone's opinion on it. So I will turn it over to Henry.
Thank you, Allison. Hey, everybody. Woolley, I think that's pretty much what you said.
Oh, and you got a Salmer sprayer there. Nice.
Yeah, for sure. Yep, so that's my little mascot there, but talking about terns today. So I'll go ahead and share my screen. I have a little quick kind of background presentation so you all have some context for what we're talking about. And then I'll show you the maps and we can talk about them. There we go. Okay. So basically, like the context for this map that I made and I'll be showing is that as part of compensatory mitigation for impacts to roseate terns and other species from offshore wind energy development, Fish and Wildlife Service is putting out a request for information, which is, you know, essentially like a publicly posted advertisement of a desire to collaborate on this project. I'll get a little bit more into definitions, stuff like that. But so immediate context is that the map that this project is for is to inform potential mitigation projects and partnerships. So briefly, I'll go over, you know, what is an RFI, how we made this map, and then what I hope to accomplish today. So basically, we're issuing an RFI for 5 listed species, roseate terns being one. So basically an RFI is like an RFP, a request for proposals, but it doesn't come with any kind of perceived promise of funding or collaboration. It's somewhat less binding. So like an RFP, it's a public, you know, publicly posted, and we'll share it around to, you know, other federal agencies, state agencies, kind of regional partnership organizations, and, you know, and then, you know, ask for them to share it on. You know, in this case, we're asking for information about these potential partners' abilities to help us do mitigation projects. And it's, as I mentioned, different from an RFP because, you know, it doesn't, we're not making any promises. And it's my understanding that this, you know, we went with a RFI over RFP because a solicitor just suggested that might be a more flexible approach. Yeah, so we'll be these maps. They're inserted into the RFI, which is a pretty substantial document outlining everything we want to accomplish and guides to, you know, submit information and stuff like that. What we really want to show with these maps is our current understanding of habitat use by these species, which will serve to highlight any data gaps that we may have about you know, the habitat use by these species, and also you know, serve to show where we're thinking about preliminary mitigation focal areas. So to make this map, and the next slide has a picture of the map, but so that, that's what it looks like. The blue is the breeding range, and then the green is non-breeding range, and with some caveats, which I'll get into. But basically, the blue breeding range I downloaded from Ecos and modified it according to, you know, feedback from Fish and Wildlife Service people, and then the non-breeding range, the green range, we are using with permission from Birds of the World. So some of the input that we got from subject matter experts, the breeding range of the northern colonies doesn't extend south of Long Island. So cut that off. south of Long Island. It does extend north into Canada, but we didn't include that because there wasn't a good shapefile that I could access, and we're focusing mainly on US territories, although the RFI is framed to say, you know, we may expand and consider international projects if feasible, but of course those come with other contexts. So that's something we can talk about if we want to change how that's shown. And I'll get into more information about the map disclaimer on the next slide, but you know, we decided how we wanted to contextualize what we're showing. You know, like a map is in some ways, and in this way, we're using it as like a jumping off point to show, you know, our understanding at this moment in time of habitat use of this species as it relates to our mitigation goals. So we're not necessarily, we're trying to be as thorough as possible, but of course things change, there's limits to information, and you know, good enough is a good enough starting place, and we can adjust as we go. One consideration was to include a migratory corridor from band 2012 model. We didn't wind up including that because it was incomplete and kind of didn't really get at mitigation focal areas, but that's something we can talk more about. I'll show you what it looks like with and without. So yeah, it's probably pretty small, the disclamatory text there, but I can read it. It's that bolded at the bottom of the map. It says the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service recognizes that the non-breeding range may extend beyond what is depicted in this map. We're committed to collaborating with mitigation partners to identify and implement appropriate mitigation projects. This map is intended to serve as a general guide reflecting the current understanding of habitat use. The USFWS does not guarantee the accuracy or completeness of the map and assumes no liability for actions or decisions made based on its content. And then the non-bolded text is data sources and ESRI copyright. So what I'd love to get your input about is, do we want to show the breeding range that's in blue extending into Canada? If so, you know, I'll either need to work with you to help me draw it, or if you're aware of any existing layers, we could use that. Another recommendation was to include a larger swath of Venezuela. The guidance related to that was that tagged common terns use a broader swath during non-breeding. And then similarly, do we want to expand what's shown in the Caribbean to include areas shown in the band migratory corridor model, which shows broad use. So this is what it looks like with the migratory corridor, just in that line, that black line. So that's what I wanted to go over. I think I should probably continue to share my screen, but I'm going to switch out of the presentation so that we can focus on these maps more, and we can switch. This is the one. Oh, and let's see. I haven't been able to, I see that there we go. Birds of the World not share the breeding range portion. That's something that I can follow up about. The saltmarsh sparrow looks sinister. You know, no telling what's on a bird's mind. Made it on the mural. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, just getting caught up with the chat. Yeah, U.S. recovery plan does include objectives for Canada. We can show that. I just need to know what to show. Yeah, and then now I'm caught up to birds of the world, not share the breeding range portion. I can follow up with birds of the world. So I'm going to get a little recommendations document going that we can work on together. And let's see. Let's see. Complete and accurate as possible. Agreed. Breeding wintering areas. Okay, we have a polygon for Atlantic Canada breeding. That's excellent. Thank you for that, Allison. And then let's see, Melissa is saying, yeah, Melissa just replied, we started with ECOS for all species coverage in the US and then reached out to other organizations for ranges outside the US. So that's why we went with that split. And honestly, it was just in talking with folks, I wound up just doing a buffer, a 24, wish I could scroll and zoom. Yeah, 24 nautical mile buffer along the coast here. So that's what that is. Yeah. So open to just kind of an open conversation. I can respond to comments in the chat. I imagine, this is pretty quick. So I wouldn't be surprised if you all have clarification questions, which I'd be happy to answer. A recommendation to, based on use telemetry data for a polygon, that I'd be open to that. I just need to have access to that data and work with someone who knows the context for it. Like, one thing I run into mapping is, I'm familiar with the tools that we use to map, but I in this case have much less of a background in understanding this species. So what I really need when I'm making these maps is to have conversations and kind of do things in real time to understand that make sure that I'm using these things correctly and showing what makes sense.
There's some hands up. Probably can't see. I think Joan.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, Henry. You might want to look at eBird as well, especially for information along the coast of Venezuela and some of the site locations for the Caribbean. That may be one of the better places, especially for Venezuela. And you can drill down into the eBird and decide what you would accept as whether you want photos or repeated sightings or whatever. But I think that could be an easy way for you to get some point locations they've already been curated by the eBird the eBird folks.
Okay.
I wouldn't rule that out. I'm just looking at the map right now, and it looks like it would be a great starting place for you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's a great point, Joan. And you can request the data from eBird, and it comes with the GPS location.
Excellent.
We have also John with a question or comment.
Yeah, just I guess a comment on the Caribbean and Venezuela, looking at stopover habitat. If that's our sample size is 3, so it's not a lot, but we're starting to gain evidence that of habitat use for this population, at least on spring migration from our data, extends a little bit into northern Venezuela and into the St. Vincent region in the Caribbean. So and we do have some evidence. Again, very small sample size, but hopefully that will continue to grow.
Yeah.
And you
So
can,
can I
we
follow
can
up
reach
with?
out to me and our partners on that.
Okay. Thank you. Here's the map with the migratory corridor. Yes, Rachel, that would be lovely if you could send that shape file. Absolutely, yeah. So that would be great. Thank you. Let's see, there's a further, okay, interesting, wintering area. Yeah, further south. Okay, cool. That's great.
And if you need more information on Caribbean nesting sites, even though that's technically not the, Northwest Atlantic breeding population, or are you looking for primarily stopover habitat?
Let's see. Well, yeah, I probably think so, because, what I do know about terns is that, roseate terns, mitigation is going to be kind of tricky. Just because they spend a lot of time, they're pelagic, and then they're very localized with where they breed. So, it may be that where we can actually get to do mitigation projects, we might be limited in that. If that kind of answers your question.
Yeah, it seems to me, and I'm sure the consensus is to make this as broad as possible rather than too restricted. We do have a lot of partners, as was brought up multiple times, that are working on tracking studies right now that could provide very specific data. So
okay.
Whatever level of data you need from us, I can help connect you with the right people.
Awesome. Okay.
And that's a great question. Melissa just brought up, is there another opportunity to review a next iteration of this, and could we share it widely to the group? Would you want that sort of input?
Yeah, I'm very open to that. I think, I've been, I should have mentioned, I've been working closely with Melissa on this project. So anything she wants to do, I'm on board with. So that's a yes for me. I'm just seeing the comment from David about the MDAT. Yeah, okay, so just to finish this thought, Allison, you can put me in touch with tracking data sources. Okay.
They're all right here pretty much, but
okay. All right. And then
oh, go ahead, sorry.
The Sarah's question, is that what you were gonna?
Oh, I was just gonna say, I just want to make sure you get all your questions out from us.
Okay, thank you. So Sarah wants to know the purpose of this. Is it to document where mitigation can occur? Would it be all right until Team Track gets their data back from this upcoming season?
Yeah, sorry, I can explain that a little bit more. And also, I apologize if you already went over this. It's just day 3 and later during the day. So my brain's a little messed up.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Yeah, so is this, you're trying to figure out where mitigation can occur, and then you're going to be presenting this to the offshore wind folks, and we're helping you kind of outline places where we would like to see mitigation happening along the track of the Roseate Terns general history.
Sorry.
Oh, no, I'm done.
Yeah. Yeah, that's like a big part of it. It's like, that's the main purpose, is to show. So these maps are inserted into a document which we're sharing with, federal and non-government partners, which is a request for information about, and I don't think I clarified this at the beginning, it's about establishing an in-lieu program or mitigation bank program, but I think specifically in-lieu for mitigation to impacts from offshore wind energy development for, these 5 species, roseate terns included. So the main goal is to communicate both, what we understand about where these species go, and also, for the purpose of highlighting both data gaps and also, appropriate areas to focus on mitigation, if that answers your question.
That does answer my question. And then when do you need the end product by?
Right. Yeah. So that's the thing. We are trying to get this document out the door. But we can, we're hoping to kind of develop partnerships with these groups so that we can basically, point being, just because this map can evolve as we get more and better information, and then we can kind of further inform our mitigation partners.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Raphael, for sharing that resource for the Brazilian website, government website. Thank you for that. And I see Caleb.
Yeah. Hey, Henry. Yeah, just my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the map is to really just guide where you get responses from people that have that kind of expertise and knowledge, right? So you're kind of going to be, I think, looping back to some of the folks here anyway, to some extent.
Absolutely.
So, I think I don't think that, in my mind anyway, it's not as critical to be exactly precise, but you do want to be comprehensive and make sure it's all encompassing, like definitely include Canada, for example,
Okay.
and everywhere where there could potentially be any kind of wintering area known, even if it's not necessarily a hotspot. I think it's better to err on the side of being inclusive than cut. I think Allison was saying this too, than cutting anything out. Anyway, yeah, that's what I would recommend. And I think it can still be, it doesn't have to be as precise. I mean, a lot of people here have data that it's really, really specific, but I think you're just looking for, general boundaries within which potential work would be done.
Exactly. Yeah.
From the perspective of, So anyway, so I think that's just so people are clear. It doesn't have to be super precise. It should be, if anything, all encompassing of where we know the boundaries to be.
Yeah, that's really good clarification. Thank you for that. That's spot on.
And I think it would be helpful to just clarify, once the in-lieu fee process is set up, that experts will be consulted on before decisions are made on its application.
Yeah, we're explicit about that in the RFI document.
Kitty.
This is Wendy. I see Grace has her hand up. Go ahead, Grace.
You're muted, Grace. Mic button is in the top right, the third thing over, if you can't find it. All right, I think we should probably move on,
Yeah.
but definitely, Grace, please put stuff in the chat. And if you want to stick around, we will be talking, about stuff that might be relevant, but up to you, obviously, Henry.
Okay, appreciate y'all. And I thanks for all these great resources. Thanks for helping me out with this, and I'll definitely be following up. And likewise, if I can help you with anything or you have any more questions, please reach out.
Sounds good. All right, so we are going to move on to our recovery planning general discussion. Jess Espinosa is actually starting her work on a Roseate Tern SSA, and she was going to present a little bit more on the process and how we could help her not have to do all the work just herself.
That would be awesome. Okay, I will share. Okay. Can you see? Yes, you see this. Okay, awesome. Okay, so hi everybody again. In case you missed my earlier presentation, I'm Jess Espinosa, but now I'm coming at you from the Fish and Wildlife side of things. I'm a Pathways intern working up in the Region 5 office in Hadley, Massachusetts, and I'm also a PhD student at UConn. I'm part of a group of people with Rachel Stevens and others at US Fish and Wildlife that's in charge of the process of creating a species status assessment, or SSA, for the roseate to help facilitate future recovery actions and to update other outdated documents. So today I'll give you a brief rundown of the process and where we are thus far. And since we have a group of experts gathered here today, I also have a couple questions to ask the group about content. So I'll start off with a brief overview of the SSA framework and why we're working on an SSA. So the purpose of the SSA is to assess a species' biological condition by describing the viability of a species in a way that supports ESA decisions, including recovery planning. The SSA generally consists of a section that provides an overview of the species' needs and the status of those needs, which leads into a section describing the species' current condition throughout its range and life cycle. Then an SSA generally includes a future species condition, which discusses potential future viability of the species under a variety of future scenarios. Once the SSA is created, it can be used to inform a number of different documents and decisions, including 5-year reviews, listing and delisting decisions, critical habitat decisions, and recovery planning documents. So when we look specifically at the purpose of creating a roseate SSA, at the most basic level, it's because there was never an SSA created for the roseate, even though it's a listed species. And now, currently, if a species is being evaluated for listing or recovery, creation of an SSA via a specific core team of people would be the first step. But since the SSA is a relatively new kind of document, there are many listed species without SSAs, including the roseate tern. So therefore, the SSA's main purpose is to inform recovery planning for roseates. And as the purpose of the roseate SSA isn't to inform a listing decision, we're treating it as a recovery SSA rather than a listing SSA. And I'll also mention that this SSA is specifically for the endangered northeastern North American population of the subspecies that breeds in the US from Maine to New York. The threatened Caribbean population is considered separate, and so it has its own recovery documentation. So as the northeastern population is already listed, it has this recovery plan that's already in place, and there are mandatory reviews of the species that take place every 5 years. The next 5-year review will be due in 2025, so getting an SSA out soon can help inform that review is one of our top priorities. And in addition, the last update to the roseate recovery plan was way back in 1998, so the species is way overdue for an updated recovery plan. So looking at the sections of the roseate SSA, we have them laid out here. we start with species needs, which includes things like a base description of the roseate tern, its range, limiting habitat features, essential life history functions, things like that. Then we move on to threats and stressors. So what's happening in general to roseate terns throughout their range, both as a whole and to specific colonies or groups in terms of resources and viability. Next, we have sections on the historical and current conditions of roseate terns. So what's happened to the species in the past to get us to this point in time, and what's the current status of the species throughout its range. Then we have future conditions and scenarios, which is where we describe future threats and how these might manifest in low threat and high threat scenarios. This might mean doing additional analyses to figure out the occupancy, abundance, or habitat of the species, how these might do under certain environmental or otherwise adverse conditions that are dictated by those threat level scenarios. And lastly, we often include conservation efforts. So this includes any good things that are happening to ameliorate the threats or stressors that we mentioned above. So as you're all roseate experts, we'd like to get your input in a little brainstorming session. So to start off, here are the major threats that we came up with that impact the whole population of roseates. These include climate change, habitat loss, changes in prey availability, predation, and disease. And on the next slides, I'll give you a chance to provide some input on variation in the threats throughout the year, as well as to specific colonies or groups. So this chart gives the primary and secondary threats for roseates specifically based on where they are at different times in the year. The stressors in gray are the major ones I mentioned in the previous page. I just didn't restate them here because we're assuming that there's threats for all of these stages, for all of these places. And you'll notice there are some empty boxes here. And I'll give everybody a minute or two to think about whether there's anything you think should be moved around, added, otherwise changed in this chart. And I'll be recording thoughts people have so that I can add them in here. And then I'll ask the same about the colonies on the next slide. So if you have specific colony threats, save those for the next slide. Awesome. Thanks. Okay, Carolyn, I think you have your hand up.
How did you decide what was a primary threat versus a secondary threat?
Good question. So mainly it was based off of the previous recovery documents that we had. They had listed out primary, secondary, and basically things that are no longer a threat. And some of those, since it is an old document, had to be slightly updated. But I'm basically going based off of that documentation with slight modification. So if you think there are things that maybe need further modification, let me know, and I'd be happy to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking about oil spills because we did have a significant oil spill in Buzzards Bay back in 2003. So I don't know if it should be in primary or secondary, but it has the potential to be, those things have the potential to be pretty devastating, but they also are likely to occur at a reduced frequency compared to things like competition from gulls, which is annual. You know, invasive plants, erosion, those are kind of annual issues. Disease, if you're looking at trying to define things that are kind of like chronic and ongoing as primary threats, you know, disease might be more like a secondary threat, like it's potentially really episodic and can be pretty devastating in some years, but it might not be an annual occurrence.
That's a good thing to note, because there are a bunch of things on here that, as you said, they are happening every year, but they might not be devastating the population or the community every year. They might It might be something we don't want, but it's not going to wipe out the entire community, for instance. But if you have, say, an oil spill, that's not likely to happen, but if it does happen, it wipes everything out. So I've been looking through other SSAs, and mainly they don't include a way to distinguish that, but it is something that I want to try and include here. So that's a good point. That this has also happened on, you said Ram Island, not Bird Island, or?
Well, it was throughout Buzzards Bay, but it was the worst on Ram. But yeah, it seems like there should be a definition somewhere for primary and secondary threats.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think Allison, you also have your hand up.
Yeah, I just quickly wanted to know if you had access or if you had the survey that we did last year to the group that summarized the threats and actions to address them, plus extra info. Have you gotten that yet? If not, I can share it with you.
Yeah, I don't know if I have the summary, but I had the slides. So that also informed some of this as well.
Perfect.
So yeah, that was a good point. I actually put some of this in here, but I don't know if there was like a better summary or something that somebody wrote up. I just have the literal screenshot of the slides.
Well, I do have a summary I can share with you, and even if it's the same, I'll still share it.
Awesome, thanks. Okay. All right, anything else before we move on to the colony specific stuff, or? Hafa?
Hey, Jess.
Hey.
I would say, oh, my camera's off. I would say for non-breeding grounds to the habitat list. Oh, sorry. There's someone
I wrote in
else.
community center and it brought me.
Maybe. Yeah, I would say habitat loss to, we start to observe. So we are just in beginning to understand of some movements in the area. But apparently the terns here select the areas based on the distance for foraging grounds. And and these areas should have some sandbanks or some projections of beach, really secure beach areas that you have been losing with the approaching of a lot of wind turbines in the coastline, and also a lot of distress in the coastline at all. So and the climate change with the rising of the ocean have been becoming a threat to losing these specific sites that probably are really important to be close to the foraging areas. So the habitat loss definitely could be something to be added in the non-breeding grounds too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the sea level rise. I'm assuming sea level rise is a threat to all of these grounds, but yeah, it's definitely it's good to know what sea level rise is specifically going to be affecting in the different areas, because as you said, it's affecting the areas close to foraging. So that's good to know. Thanks. And I might ping you again about some other stuff. Thanks. All right. Anything else, or then I can move on to the next slide. You can also
There's
ask
a lot. I'm not sure if you can see it, but there's really a lot of comments in the chat.
I can't see the comments.
Yeah.
Let me see.
A lot of good.
Yeah, because I'm only seeing my window, and I don't know if somebody's able to read out any of those. Sorry.
Yeah, just, I mean, some of the stuff is about where, what stages some of this stuff is potentially occurring in, for example, well, some of the most recent, we're talking about offshore wind and other kind of wind in on the non-breeding grounds. Also exploratory oil off of Brazil is ramping up. We have some, let's see, anthropogenic disturbance on staging grounds. Someone mentioned, what about hurricanes to breeding grounds? We haven't had one in a while, but have had them in the past, and that is true. They can have an impact, storms in general, not even just hurricanes. Let's see, add sand mining for beach nourishment as a major threat to roseate terns at staging areas around Cape Cod. I'm actually copying these chats, and I can, they're not going to be available for a while on the Marine Bird Cooperative website, but I can share them with you if it's helpful earlier than that.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Send you a link. Yep. Because there's a lot of good suggestions in here.
Yeah, feel free. Thanks, Caleb. Feel free.
Sure.
Anybody else to keep putting stuff in the chat. I also don't want to take up all the time, so I might move to the next slide, and then of course feel free to add anything else or email me as well, because I know we only have a few minutes. So okay, so here this is now looking closer at the breeding colonies. And we know again that there are similar threats that span all the colonies that I went over before. But for these, we're really interested in specific threats that you're seeing to specific colonies or groups above. And I'll also note that these groups right now are broken into analysis units based on location and the latest recovery planning documents. And the three largest colonies, so ram, bird, and a great gull, they're being treated as separate entities. And we didn't include non-breeding grounds here because they're in the other slide. But that would be an additional analysis unit. And as I work on great gull, I filled in some of those boxes for the colony, but I don't know specific threats about other colonies. So feedback's welcome. Again, I don't want to take up all the time. Feel free to put stuff in the chat. Feel free to email, but if anybody has comments, that would be great.
Jess, I'm happy to email you about bird and ram threats. It's a lot of the same ones that you showed on your earlier slide.
That would be great. Thanks, Carolyn.
Yeah, if it would be helpful, Jess, to have some sort of form that we could send to colony managers for these sorts of things. I'm happy to help distribute that.
Yeah, that's probably a good idea. To get some info.
You could start, Jess, with you could start with the list of the Great Gull Island threats that we did in the workshop and just build that out. Just grab that off the Marathi share. We can give that to you, and a lot of people just tick the same boxes.
Yeah, I figure a lot of people do, but just to try and be thorough. But yeah, I'll check on that as well. I couldn't fit everything else in this small chart, but Rachel, you have your hand up.
Ask if people would be kind enough to copy me on those information sharing emails that you're sending to Jess as well, please, because when her expertise has graduated, it's going to be left on me to finish up these other supporting documents. So that would be really helpful. Appreciated.
Most certainly, and I'll share your email in the chat so everyone has it. Once again.
Thank you.
And Margaret.
Yeah, Jess, I just wanted to remind you on this business of ranking primary versus secondary threats in that Marathi file that Joan just referred to, and in the conservation plan, we're developing anyway. There was a process for deciding what was primary and what was secondary, and that might help you think about how to classify things, not only on great gull, but sort of trying to take a similar conceptual approach, at least, to what's primary and secondary elsewhere as well.
Yeah, it's a good idea. Okay, yeah, I'll look at that. Yeah, I was basically going based off the old documents, but it's seeming like they're not super clear on that. So, and we probably just need to update for that. So it's a good idea. Okay. Anything else? I mean, we started late, so I'm not sure. But
well, this
feel
is
free
the
to-
most important part of the whole thing is us just, coming together and thinking about all the stuff we've been doing and how it can lead to recovery. So, as much time as we need for this, that's fine.
Cool. And again, I'll look at the chat after I stop sharing. I just can't see it unless I...
If you go to the top center, you can click people, actually, like next to like on your PowerPoint presentation, and then it'll bring up this, and you can see the chat too if you click chat.
That was weird. Okay, I thought it was just people, but that makes sense. Thanks, Allison.
Yeah,
It's a new discovery for me today.
And don't feel just like you have to write everything down, because I'm taking notes and I'll just send them to you in an email afterwards.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Yep.
And I'll just put up this last slide here in case anybody has any questions about SSAs or the Roseate info on Fish and Wildlife. These links are great. And here's my email as well, in case you don't have that. Yeah, I'm just looking through the chat right now.
And while you're doing that, I'm actually just gonna share something that I was planning on talking about, which is like literally the same stuff. So this will go well, I think. This was kind of a summary of some of the things we talked about last year. Some of the outcomes of the additional threats that we talked about. And I was hoping that, this might spur on people just to think a little bit more. Like right now, it seems like the group is really focused on figuring out movement patterns for these birds, where they're going, what they're doing, which is so critical. But we have still some outstanding things on our 2023 meeting thoughts. And I thought that there might also be more things that people need to put in here. And some of this will, of course, could inform the SSA. But I think just inform all of us of like, is there more stuff we should be worrying about? It looks like, the nest box thing. So if we look at the black part, that is what we kind of talked about last year as additional threats that we hadn't really been thinking about, maybe as a group, or at least in my knowledge, as much previously, or maybe people had been and it just came out. But if there's more stuff that we should think about beyond this. So nest boxes, I think a lot of work is being done on that, obviously by Jess and others, Carolyn and others. A lot of, a big one is thinking about the small islands and how losing them potentially could impact the population. Some of this going into a PVA, thinking about adult mortality and how that's related to climate change. A lot of discussion about forage fish and what might happen with some of these offshore wind projects, as well as other things happening. The relationships between common terns and roseate terns, I think, is an interesting one that maybe isn't in your document yet. And if that's an important relationship, and like, can roseate terns persist on a large island without common terns? And what happens if we lose our common terns? And then, of course, some of the other things here over on the right that are a little bit more specific. But if anyone else has anything that we should add to this, speak up or throw that in the chat as well, because I think these are just some avenues that we can think about for continued research. And yeah, genetic bottleneck, that's a good one. Which leads kind of to needing to analyze that data that was brought back from Brazil on who's who with the birds that are perishing in Brazil, as well as what's going to happen if we lose our small colonies? Is that kind of both of those things? And okay, sorry, Margaret, feel free to speak up.
Thanks, Allison, and thanks for actually bringing us back to this set of thoughts from the 2023 meeting here on the nest box question, and that first question on your list. Whether empty nest boxes suggest we're not habitat limited. I think, Jess's really great work on the subject at Great Gull Island suggests pretty strongly that boxes are not boxes are not boxes, right? That it matters what you put out, that they actively are rejecting boxes that don't have certain characteristics that they actually care about, and we'll have a much better idea of whether or not we have, we're habitat limited or population limited, whether we just don't have enough birds to fill the available boxes when we've done a better job of replacing those boxes with models that Jess's works suggest sort of, maximize the occupancy. And I think, everybody working together to look carefully at how the birds are interacting with their boxes and how those birds are doing compared to birds out of boxes would really help us a lot in understanding whether we've got unoccupied habitat out there or not.
Thank you. That's helpful. Sure. Carolyn.
Thanks, Allison. I wanted to talk for a minute about the small sites. I think we've spent a lot of time stressing out over the years about our sites not getting bigger. And, the original recovery plan aims to establish, I think it's 5 large colonies with over 200 pairs each, if I'm not mistaken. Jess has probably looked at that more recently than I have. And, that's really been a struggle. And as others have said before, I think we have to accept that the roseates want to be aggregated, and they don't really, most of them don't really want to be in the small colonies, and that's why we're not being successful. However, it is incredibly important to be maintaining these small colonies because of big episodic events. And we did see that when we had a major oil spill, that one of our small colonies became a big colony. It didn't last forever, but it provided a very important function during episodic events. And, one episodic event could be a new administration in the next 4 years, or will be a new administration in the next 4 years that could have very large impacts on how especially our federal partners are able to manage their colonies. It may impact common tern colonies, common terns more than roseates, but the potential to lose some of these small colonies that our federal partners are managing because of issues related to the upcoming administration is maybe a primary threat. We've got this absolutely astounding colony of common terns at Monomoy that is going to be under real threat if Monomoy does not have the funds to manage. So I think we just have to be keeping in the forefront the real importance of these small colonies, the real importance of our federally managed colonies. And all of our a lot of us are under a lot of funding strain, state of Massachusetts as well. So we really need to keep our collaborative spirit strong within the group and help each other out where we can. You know, I've benefited from that collaboration many times, and you know, more so in the past decade when our funding has become unstable. So really appreciate everyone who's, you know, working on all of this stuff, breeding area, wintering area, and all of that. We really need to stick together. Thanks.
That's so true, Carolyn. Thank you. That was really good for us to remember. And that's an important part of this group, working to help the species together. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the lack of redundancy in this population. We have been able over the last few years with some concerted effort to be able to really increase the size of the great gull colony. And I wonder if we should be thinking about exporting some of those tools and trying to restore or model where another good colony could possibly be, with the attempt to develop some other satellite sites. We are going to have Plum Island online at some point. We're going to have to know how to get roseates there. There are sites like Gardiner's Island, as well as Penaquis, where we did have good colonies, where we don't anymore. We stay very focused on what we already have, rightfully so. But if we don't think about things like barges, for instance, if we don't start experimenting with stuff like that now, the folks 25 years from now are not going to be happy with us. So I think taking the tools that we're all that are successful at being able to grow our large colonies and bringing them to smaller sites may end up being something that really could benefit us in the future.
And I think another great example to pull from Great Gull is just the fact that you guys have been working on, you know, management plan, and I'm sure that that's been, you know, thought of and probably worked on many other colonies as well. And I think sharing those with each other and developing them in conjunction would be really helpful, I think, for the species as well, in this vein of things.
Yeah, the management planning is really great because it helps you to do more with less and to stay focused.
Awesome. All right. Thank you, everyone, for your thoughts on this. If you have any other thoughts that come to you at any point, feel free to reach out. I did want to make clear that, you know, Rachel is going to be taking over a lot of, in fact, by a lot, I mean, probably all of the regulatory work for Roseate Terns. But, you know, due to time constraints, it might be hard for her to focus completely on the recovery side of things. Suzanne and myself will always be working on that with you all. And so you have a lot of resources within the service to help you. But obviously we're not the only resources. You have all of each other. And so, you know, this working group is really successful just because of everyone who's here and everyone who cares about the birds. And so if there is anything that you are thinking of that the working group can help push forward, such as if there are additional, you know, breakout groups that need to happen that I assume you probably don't need help with because everyone knows everyone. But anything in that vein of things, please reach out. Bring them up now, bring them up later. We're all here to work together on that. And with that being said, if anyone has anything else they wanted to discuss, we still have 35 people here for the last 3 minutes. So we could get one more quick discussion going. Reference genome, yeah. All right, looks like DNA stuff's in the works. Okay, well, it looks like everyone is ready to move along. I just want to say thank you so much. I know most everyone's gone, but thank you to everyone who took the time to join us, to speak, to share all the great work they've been doing. You're all incredible, and the species wouldn't be around without you. So thank you so much. Thank you, Caleb, and thank you to Suzanne, who couldn't make it this week, but also put in some good work with setting up the meeting. So thank you.
Thanks, Allison. Been great working with you. Good job.
Definitely.
Thanks everybody for
everyone.
all your great work.